cover all the earth. Bow in adoration, and I rise in confidence. I will see your goodness. Cover all the earth. I bow in adoration, and I rise in confidence. And I will see your goodness. Cover all the earth. I bow in adoration, and I rise in confidence. And I will see your goodness. Cover all the earth. I bow in adoration, and I rise in confidence. And I will see your goodness. Cover all the earth. I bow in adoration, and I rise in confidence. And I will see your goodness. Cover all the earth. I bow in adoration, and I rise in confidence. And I will see your goodness. Cover all the earth. I bow in adoration, and rise in confidence. And I will see your goodness. Cover all the earth. Won't you cover all the earth? Cover all the earth. Cover all the earth. Cover all the earth. Cover all the earth. Cover all the Rise in confidence. I will see your goodness while the breath is in my lungs. Bow in adoration. Rise in confidence. I will see your goodness while the breath.
Welcome, everyone. This is Kingdom and Context. You're watching Torah Portions, and I'm Sean, your host. I want to thank you for joining us. Hopefully that was encouraging to you this morning. Some wonderful praise music. It's definitely a part of our just our wonderful expression of faith, right? We just get to use what God gave us to give him praise. So it's a wonderful heritage that he's given us. So, guys, today we are jumping into the book of Exodus as we continue our journey in our Torah portions. We'll be looking at Exodus 1 through the end of 5, and we have some companion passages to go with them. And we also have a couple of good brothers here to join me as we read along. Here's Nick going to join us today. Welcome, brother.
Shabbat Shalom.
Hey, Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for joining me. We also have Hannibal's joining us again today. Thank you, brother.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Hey, Shabbat Shalom. Glad you guys could be here. And I think we've got some fun passages to go through. We're jumping into the book of Exodus. So like we left off last week at the end of Genesis, all the Israelites were in the land of Goshen as they had moved down there under the reign of Joseph. But times are a-changing in the story. Joseph and all his brothers are going to pass away, and there's going to be some conflict coming up. So we're going to read about that today. Let me see here. Hannibal, would you like to take chapter 1?
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
Exodus chapter 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah; Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin; Dan and Naphtali; Gad and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all, including Joseph, who was already in Egypt. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were fruitful and increased rapidly. They multiplied and became exceedingly numerous, so the land was filled with them. Then a new king, who did not know Joseph, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become too numerous and too powerful for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase even more. And if a war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So the Egyptians appointed taskmasters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. As a result, they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and flourished. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. They worked the Israelites ruthlessly and made their lives bitter with hard labor and in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. Every service they imposed was harsh. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose name was Siphrah and Puah, when you help the Hebrew woman give birth, observe them on the birth stools. If the child is a son, kill him. But if it's a daughter, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had instructed, to let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before a midwife arrives. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son born to the Hebrews you must throw into the Nile, but every daughter you may allow to live.
Okay, thank you, brother. So yeah, we've got some interesting little turn of events here, with a new king that's taken over. No respect to the Israelites or Joseph and his descendants, and he's just trying to kill them.
Yep.
And I think it's what verse was it here where he says, I think verse 10, where he openly says, let's deal shrewdly with them, or they will continue to increase. If a war breaks out, they may join our enemies and fight against us and leave the country. It's amazing to me, this type of paranoia. It's like, what kind of ancient ganja was this guy smoking? Like, just relax, bro. They've been in your land, contributing to your land peacefully this for hundreds of years. Just chill. Like, he's just turning it literally that authoritarian mindset of Babylon that just turns on its own people in state oppression.
And the times that they lived in, we see that even in 2 Samuel chapter 11, right, where it says that it was a time of spring where people went out to battle. So it was so common, and we live in a very blessed time period, at least here in the West, where we haven't seen any war in our close proximity, right? But back then it was like, well, when it's warm enough to wear a t-shirt, it's warm enough to kill my neighbor, pretty much. And they were just it was crazy. So
it was
insane.
It was a weird mentality. So yeah, they appoint some taskmasters, and this means also that the Egyptians willingly were complicit with this concept. So just like in every country throughout all of history, doing what you're told is never an excuse to get away with murder. You know what I mean? Or to do some injustice. And that just seems to be the intimidation in the forced oppression of your own people towards another people group. But yet, if people are not standing up for righteousness, then you're going to have this issue every single time, which we've seen throughout history, right? You got the tyrannical leader who asks his people and his henchmen to do things, and they just keep doing it, And yes, I know in certain cases throughout history, you have coups or rebellions within that leadership rank, and then sometimes they're successful, other times they get squashed real quick. But we don't see any of that happening here, whereas the Egyptians just immediately start oppressing the Israelites, right, according to the command of Pharaoh, this new king. And but we kind of, I guess, saw this coming, if you will, in the last several chapters of Genesis from 45 to 50, where it mentioned a couple times that even the Israelites didn't want to eat with the Hebrews, and that when Joseph told Jacob, hey, when you introduce yourself to Pharaoh, do it like this, because they don't really like shepherds. You know what I mean? So it's very interesting, because they seem to have this disposition already that the Egyptians didn't really like the Hebrew people, or just because of their profession alone, which it's kind of weird bias, unloving bias.
Mhm.
So they just pick up the slave rod and start beating their neighbors, which is obviously not Torah, and creates this conflict here where they absolutely continue to flourish, even though they're trying to be oppressed, I guess, through forced labor. But then it gets so severe that the king of Egypt says, all right, let's just start doing infanticide, which is, from what I understand here in verse 16, it says when they're being born, let the boy, like as soon as they're born, kill the child. So what, I guess when I'm not a midwife and I don't know exactly the process, but what exactly did the Pharaoh think that these Hebrew midwives could just kill the baby somehow as it was being born and then play it off to the parents as if it was a stillborn somehow? And the parents
Interesting.
not look at the midwife and immediately take retribution on her? Like how many times could you get away with this? If they carried this
Yeah.
out, they didn't carry it out. But if you tried, like, what was the king of Egypt truly expecting? The Hebrew midwives, how many did he expect these two ladies to get away with doing this? Because I don't think many parents would have stood for that very long.
Yeah, and modern historians, they estimate, what was it, 2.4 million Israelites at this time. So, I mean, it must have been at least 300,000 to 400,000 baby boys that he was trying
Yeah.
to kill.
Wow.
Evil is not always they don't have the most thought out plans. Sometimes it's just, murder. So I don't even think the Pharaoh thought that far, that, how will the midwives keep doing it? He just thought, kill them.
Yeah, man, like I said, when you look into the ancient practices of Egypt, and they were not serving Yahweh. And especially that we're going to talk about later who this particular Pharaoh was, this new king that rose up, and where he came from and who he's related to and what's going on, or at least what we can speculate with good speculation from the scriptures about who this guy was and where he came from. And it would make perfect sense that this guy's not in his right mind, because he's full on in occultic behavior, which means, according to their rituals, lots of drug and alcohol use. So this guy's just not thinking straight. I agree with you, Hannibal. He's not thinking this through, because, I would imagine you get away with that for very long before the parents just kill the midwives.
Yeah.
Because they'll have like all the traditional signs that the pregnancy was good and viable baby leading up to the delivery. So just suddenly you start having thousands of stillborns. Yeah, that wouldn't happen for very long. But still, thankfully, these Hebrew midwives, they did respect the father and they didn't get away with it. So here in the summary for chapter 1, I just have a couple things jotted down here, that the 12 families of the descendants of Jacob were all living in Goshen, Egypt, and they were thriving during the remaining lifespan of their brother Joseph. We're going to get into that a little deeper with our companion passage. The new ruler, who didn't know Joseph, came to power in Egypt, and he encouraged the Egyptian people to view the Hebrews as a threat to their safety and country. And this is what's crazy to me, guys, is that, like this, I mean, just Nick, just imagine if the mayor of Denver suddenly announced that, all the Israelites, there's several synagogues in Denver. They have a pretty large Jewish population, right? What if he just announced all the Israelites were a threat? We should go ahead and subjugate them and put them into work camps.
Don't think it'd go too well.
It's crazy. It's just so this was a campaign, I guess, is what I'm getting at. This is a political campaign that had to be, that information, that message had to be disseminated amongst Egyptians for them to go along with this and suddenly say, okay, we're going to go. And we don't get the practical details of, like, how did this actually start to happen? Because from what I understood from the remaining chapters of Genesis that we read, or the latter chapters of Genesis, the Israelites moved down to the land of Goshen and were kind of in their own segmented area, if you will. They weren't in the main cities of Egypt because they needed the land for their cattle and their herds and their sheep and stuff. So it makes me wonder if, like, what do you do? Just like show up with your army to Goshen one day and start just taking men from among them? Like, there had to have been a practical way this was implemented.
Yeah, slowly seeding people in, maybe sleeper cells of sorts. And I don't know, it kind of reminds me of the Jesuits, how they try to do political overthrow, but make it look like it wasn't them. Maybe they did something like that.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we see something similar taking place, even now, right? In the political sphere of painting people against each other, and this whole thing of us who are being called out, even if we might live in the cities, we usually don't hang out in the same circles. So it's easy to sort of paint a group of people in a negative light unless when you're not interacting with them. And we see the same thing happening here in Egypt. It's a tactic as old as time itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Come, Lord, quickly. Yeah. This is crazy stuff. So the Egyptians oppressed the Hebrews into forced labor, but they only multiplied and flourished all the more. That's an interesting caveat that's repeated both in Genesis 46 and Exodus 1, that the hard times just made the Hebrews seem to make more babies and just continue to populate. Pharaoh instructed the Hebrew midwives to kill any baby boy or any boy born to the Hebrew women, but the midwives refused to do so out of respect for God. And Pharaoh then instructed all the Egyptians to kill every Hebrew baby boy by throwing into the Nile. So now he's upped the ante, right? These two women, who I guess were very popular midwives, he realized that's not going to work. So now he's just encouraging literal mass civil strife and chaos. Because think about the practicality of this. Like, he's not, from what I understood it, I mean, unless you guys saw something different in the text, he didn't say specifically to the army of Egypt, go and round up all the baby boys. Although I wouldn't doubt they were a part of the brute squad that would have run around to try to grab them. But he's telling all the Egyptians, just plainly all the Egyptians, to kill every Hebrew baby boy that's born. So that means he's literally encouraging neighbor versus neighbor. And this is absolutely, even from all right, say you're just a political strategist, and like take his own statement from the very beginning of the chapter. He's worried about this people group because they've become more numerous than the Egyptians, and he's worried that they're going to turn on them and not be loyal to them and somehow side with their enemies in case there's ever a conflict. But yet he's literally creating the strife for them not to like the Egyptians, which would become a self-fulfilling prophecy in his own stupidity. It's just so clearly, hopefully, guys, we're expounding upon the idea why sin does not profit you. Mindsets of this king came and took over and started all this. Clearly, he's insane. The guy in modern times would be just simply described as he's tripping. He has absolutely no forethought, no long terms. I mean, he's literally trying to destroy the nation of Egypt, much less the actual people of the Israelites. So
yeah. We see that, Paul writing about that in Ephesians 4:18, right? That the Gentiles are darkened in their understanding because of the hardening of their hearts. That's what unrighteousness does to you, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else in this chapter, guys?
I had one. What do you guys think about in the Septuagint, how there's a third store city that's not mentioned here?
Which verse is that?
In Exodus 1:11. In the Septuagint, there's a third city called On, or Heliopolis, which is the seat of worship of the sun god Ra. And fun fact, I don't know if it's so fun, but the oldest obelisk in existence today actually came from that city. And it was right next to Cairo, so it would have been, in my mind, the biggest store city, right by the pyramids.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's actually previously mentioned in Genesis and in Jubilees, as far as Joseph's wife, Asenath, was the daughter of the priest of On. So I'm wondering what this means by they built as those three cities they built as store cities for Pharaoh, unless they just, there were existing establishments that they added to multiple structures too as a part of the forced labor. I've also heard historians say that in Goshen there's all these intricate walls that have been excavated, and that they believe that was a part of the forced labor because they were making the bricks, as we're going to read in the following chapters. And these walls are made out of all these bricks, and that these walls lined like hundreds of miles in different areas. And it was like this advanced, or I shouldn't say advanced, but just very extensive and elaborate type of military ramparts and different strategies for these walls and their placements and stuff. And so I'm wondering if that's what their inference is here in verse 11, because or are we just to assume they built the entire cities of Pithom and Ramesses?
Yeah.
I think the dates lined up for two of them. I think Ramses might have been older, but yeah, and I mean, they were under their oppression for what, 430 years? And before that, they just had 500 years of warfare in Egypt, so all the cities were broken, and that would make a lot of sense that they rebuilt a lot more than what's just mentioned there in 11.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. And that also, I guess we'd be led to believe that all the I don't know that it doesn't tell you specifically, and we don't take our biblical cues from the animated movie, The Prince of Egypt. So it doesn't tell you exactly if all the obelisks and the pyramids and different types of buildings were built by the actual Israelites. But I know that they have found various temples to Egyptian gods in excavations, specifically in the region of Goshen. And so I've heard people, theorize, along with the walls, did the Israelites also build these? So, and just because they're building the bricks for them, does that mean that they also knew how to build the actual structures as an engineer? I would say they picked it up, because we see them putting together some pretty accomplished, not just engineering, but artistry and metalworking. And, once we get into the latter portions of Exodus, they start building the tabernacle. These were men of great skill and wisdom in that type of building practices. So it seems like they picked it up while they were there.
Yeah. Another tiny point in this chapter, while we're still on the differences in manuscripts, is that in Septuagint, Exodus 1:5, it says that it was 75 souls, and I mentioned it in a previous passage. But if you look at the oldest fragment of this passage found in Dead Sea Scrolls, it's in K4, Papyri 1, so it's 4Q1, 2nd century BCE. In Hebrew, it says 75. So this is a passage where Septuagint is correct, I believe.
Yeah, it actually explains in Jubilees, I can't remember what chapter
44.
it is. In Jubilees 44, where it talks about the 5 people who died in the land of Canaan. They were still sometimes considered, like you're saying, they were kind of counted, but really technically not. So it just depends on how that manuscript portrays it. So good call, good catch. All right, guys. Nick, you want chapter 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Now a man of the house of Levi married a daughter of Levi, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got him a papyrus basket and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child on the basket and set it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. And his sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Soon the daughter of Pharaoh went down to bathe in the Nile, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. And when she saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maidservant to retrieve it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the little boy was crying. So she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call one of the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" "Go ahead," Pharaoh's daughter told her. And the girl went and called the boy's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse him for me, and I will pay you your wages." So the woman took the boy and nursed him. When the child had grown older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses and explained, "I drew him out of the water." One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to his own people and observed their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. After looking this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian, and hid his body in the sand. The next day, Moses went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you attacking your companion?" But the man replied, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you planning to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "This thing I have done has surely become known." When Pharaoh heard about this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, where he sat down beside a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. And when some shepherds came along and drove them away, Moses rose up to help them and watered their flock. When the daughters returned to their father Reuel, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds," they replied. "He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "So where is he?" their father asked. "Why did you leave the man behind? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man, and he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. And she gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." After a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned and cried out under their burden of slavery, and their cry for deliverance from bondage ascended to God. So God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the Israelites and took notice.
All right, thank you, brother.
Mhm.
So this is Exodus chapter 2. The plot intensifies. So we got Moses being born. Parents don't want to kill him, obviously, and they want to hide him from apparently every single Egyptian that can just have the freedom to walk around and kill people, which is utterly insane environment to even think that you're living in. You know,
Yeah.
how do you? Yeah. It really reminds me, that whole mentality, as I was thinking more about it, reminds me of the book of Tobit, where the northern house goes in exile across the Euphrates. And this was how the Assyrians in Nineveh and that area, in Ecbatana and all these other cities, were treating the Israelite exiles, where they would just randomly find one and kill them. And the king was doing nothing about it. There was no justice. And they were just laying dead in the streets, you know, and Tobit would hear about it and rush out to go try to bury him out of respect. And so it's just that mentality of, you know, Moses' parents are like, "Oh, we had this wonderful baby," which means she'd been pregnant for 9 months, had the baby for 3 months, and then suddenly she's like, "Oh, we can't hide this anymore." So I don't know what happened, other than just, you don't want your kid to grow up in a closet for 20 years of his life. Or you don't want to send him away out of the country, because how do you hide a child who doesn't know how to be quiet and is crying, and you know what I mean? And even when he turns 4 or 5 and can start talking, and you have to take him out in public, right? Well, they would see that and just immediately go grab him to kill him. So horrible environment for the parents to make this decision. Man, what are some thoughts that you had, Hannibal, when you were reading this?
Well, like you said, the heart of Moses, we see something similar in Genesis 24, right? With Rebecca watering the camels of Laban, and also Jacob in Genesis 29, I believe, watering the flock of Uncle Laban. You know, we see this recurring theme. Yeah, we see 2 names here for Jethro, right? Reuel and Jethro. We see, you know, similar things for other characters in the scripture, but the first time I read it, I was sort of confused about the whole thing. And the same thing when we see Jethro again in Exodus 19 and 18, I believe, when he comes to visit the Israelites in the wilderness. What else stuck out to me here? Well, yeah, the fact that it's not like the father forgot the covenant he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's more like when his people start to cry out and really complain about the situation is when he acts. So, and we see this theme throughout the scriptures that when the people really start to cry out, we see it especially the first time, I think, in the scripture is in the book of Enoch, right? When the watchers and their sons are just causing mayhem, and the blood of people are crying, and it's coming before the Father, making suit, and the archangels are listening and, you know, come before the Father. And it's not like the Father didn't see it. It's more like when we pray, he hears us, right? So like Hebrews 11:6 says, when we approach him, we have to believe that he exists, and he's a reward of those who diligently seek him. So, you know, for those of you guys that feel convicted about not spending enough time in your prayer closet, I think this chapter is a great encouragement for us to spend more time, because he does hear us, especially when we cry out as his people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, he's the covenant is just constantly being reminded by Yahweh to the people that it's a big deal to him. So
Yeah.
whether we remember it or not, it's a big deal to him. He wants to make sure to keep his side of it. And so real quick, we have a summary here of chapter 2. Moses' parents are introduced, and his mother hides the 3-month-old baby Moses, but places him in a waterproof basket in the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter discovers the basket while bathing. Miriam, Moses' sister, was present, and she convinced Pharaoh's daughter to find a Hebrew woman to nurse Moses. So Moses' mother was given the responsibility of weaning and caring for Moses until he was of the age to enter the royal courts of Egypt. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth as we go into Genesis 40 or Jubilees 46. But we have indicators of that in the Genesis account, and I'm going to point those out here in just a minute. And once grown, Moses was placed under the care of Pharaoh's daughter, and she gave him the name Moses because she drew him out of the water. So once we actually, even though Exodus doesn't give you a detailed year-by-year accounting of Moses' life, we see these little indicators, and this is one of them, where once Moses is brought back to Pharaoh's daughter, then she gives him the name Moses. Therefore, he went by some other name up until that time, living with his Hebrew family. Now, I know a lot of people who love the book of Jasher. They like to bring and mention that there's like 8 different names for Moses. So, I personally don't place a lot of trust in the book of Jasher that we have today. So, but I just do think it's interesting that Moses is the name, if you look closely, given by Pharaoh's daughter and not by Moses' parents. So it's just an interesting thought there. Now fully grown, Moses went to see his Hebrew brothers engaged in hard labor. He saw and killed an Egyptian taskmaster who was beating his fellow Hebrew brethren, and he buried him in the sand. Now, in the book of Acts, chapter 7, Stephen says that this moment happened when Moses was 40 years old, that he fled when he was 40. So hopefully, it's like if we go back to these verses here, in verse 11, it says, one day after Moses had grown up. Well, that means at this point in verse 11, he's 40 years old. So if we go back to verse 10, it says, when the child had grown older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. Well, how old is that? How old is older?
Right.
I would posit that the book of Jubilees tells us he was 21 years old. He grew up to be 3 weeks of years, so it's going to be 21 years. And then he was brought to Pharaoh's daughter to be taught in all the wisdom and knowledge of Egypt and be considered her child and under her care. So that means he spent 19 years from 21 years old to 40 years old as a quote unquote prince of Egypt.
Yeah. We see the exact timeline of how long he spent in these different parts in Egypt and then in Midian and then back in the wilderness in I think the end of Jubilees 47 and beginning of chapter 47 and beginning of chapter 48. And that's another apologetics for what we see in Acts. Stephen saying that Moses was there at 40, and how long he spent in Midian. We don't get the exact dates anywhere else except for in Jubilees.
Yeah, and I know that this is actually a particular moment in verse 11 is a point of contention between the Jasher account because it claims that he was 18 years old when he fled, and so that's a pretty big discrepancy from 18 to 40.
You see that a lot in Jasher. They should be easy to get right. It doesn't. So
yeah, it's pretty rough. Nick, any thoughts? What'd you think while reading this, brother?
I just thought of how hard it must have been for his mom to put him in the river at 3 months old. And then another interesting part, the word for tar used here is the same word used for the tar that was covering the ark, Noah's Ark, Kippur, I think it was.
Yeah, they did some waterproofing. So that, because it clearly making a basket, usually it's not waterproof. So you got to paste it up on the outside and inside. And so I just wonder, it just makes you wonder what they thought was going to happen. How long do they think they were going to get? It just sounds like a quick decision was made because here come some Egyptians looking for baby boys through our city or through our area. Quick, put him in the basket, tar it up, and throw it in the river. I don't see any long-term planning either on this account on Moses' parents.
Yeah, and it doesn't say she makes the basket; it says she grabs the basket or attains the basket. So yeah, definitely implies it was fast.
Very rough circumstances. So instead of being hid in an attic like Anne Frank. He's hid in the water in a basket.
Yeah.
From
Lucky a crocodile didn't go by.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's all types of things in a river that would have gladly have just tipped that basket over and ate that baby.
Yeah.
So Moses' murder was known by the Hebrews and later discovered by Pharaoh, causing Moses to flee as a fugitive from Egypt. Moses settled in the land of Midian, where he married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, who's the priest of Midian. And we're going to see a lot more encounters with that as we delve further into Exodus. But if there's nothing else in chapter 2, I'll go to chapter 3, guys.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You guys ready? Okay. So here in Exodus chapter 3, meanwhile, Moses was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mount of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from within a bush. Moses saw the bush ablaze with fire, but it was not consumed. So Moses thought, I must go over there and see this marvelous sight. Why is the bush not burning up? When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called out to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, he answered. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord said, I have indeed seen the affliction of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their oppressors, and I'm aware of their sufferings. I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of Israelites has reached me, and I have seen how severely the Egyptians are oppressing them. Therefore, go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses asked God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? I will surely be with you, God said, and this will be the sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, all of you will worship God on this mountain. Then Moses asked God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your forefathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also told Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is how I am to be remembered in every generation. Go, assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me and said, I have surely attended to you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I've promised to bring you up out of your affliction in Egypt, into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to what you say, and you must go with them to the king of Egypt and tell him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now please let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not allow you to go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders I will perform among them, and after that he will release you. And I will grant this people such favor in the sight of the Egyptians that when you leave, you will not go away empty-handed. Every woman shall ask her neighbor and any man staying in her house for silver and gold, jewelry, and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters. So you will plunder the Egyptians. Okay. So this is a pretty interesting chapter here. We got some. What are your thoughts, guys?
Well,
Anything come to mind first?
it's interesting that the whole story here of the Exodus is regarding the Israelites wanting to go sacrifice and do a feast day, right? And the big argument against Torah is that it wasn't given until after the Exodus. But the whole point of the Exodus is to follow the law. It's just so obvious once you see it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems as if it's interesting that he tells Moses, all right, here's what you're going to tell your people, the Israelites, that I'm going to bring you into the land of the Canaanites. But I'm going to give you a slightly different message to tell Pharaoh, which is we're going to take this 3-day journey into the wilderness to sacrifice and do a feast to God. So let's just for conversation's sake, what if Pharaoh had said yes the first time? What if he would just, just randomly had said, "Oh, okay, you guys go and come back after 3 days."
Yeah.
Would
I
God
mean,
have just said after the feast? Would God have just said, "Okay, guys, now we're going north. We're not going back to Egypt."
Right. Leave all your stuff. He won't. Yeah. If they took everything with them, Pharaoh would have known something was up.
Yeah.
So.
And I think we're going to see that in the following chapters, this big back and forth with Moses, Aaron, and Pharaoh, where Pharaoh's like, "Yeah, you guys can go, but don't take your animals. You guys can go, but leave the kids here. Oh, you guys can go, but all these little caveats." And then he was like, "No, we need to go according to how we need to go with everybody and all of our stuff and everything." And that seemed like a big red flag to Pharaoh, which it should, right?
Yeah.
It should. So it's interesting that it's not even, and we're going to get into this here in a minute, but because where this Pharaoh even came from, or this new king even came from, it would make sense that you wouldn't tell them the same full message, because for one, okay, how do I say this? This is an assumption. I want to make this very clear to everyone listening. But when we kind of delve into the highly likely scriptural possibility of where this Pharaoh came from, it would make absolute sense that Yahweh, not Yahweh, but this Pharaoh, as well as all the people in the land, knew that the Israelites formerly possessed with great power and authority where Jacob came from. Remember, we talked about the end of Genesis, how the Jacob was ruling over the 7 Amorite kings in that region. He owned lots of land. He still owns it in the days of Joseph. And they all knew the Israelites in the land of Canaan. And they all knew that they were coming back. And this is the thing that even, in the writings of Josephus, he mentions this in one of his books about how the city states in Canaan, of all these tribes that are mentioned, they fortified their cities with battle armaments and extra fortifications for all this time that the Israelites were in Egypt, knowing that at some point these guys were going to come back because the land was promised to them. So, and they were there by sedition, that they knew it wasn't their land to begin with anyway. And so it's just interesting, like, from a spiritual perspective, the unclean spirits that are influencing these evil kings, they know, okay, the children of promise are out of the land. How do we keep them out of the land? Because we know the Father has a plan for them to come back into this land and possess it forever. So it's like, yeah. But I guess I'm rambling a little bit, going too far on that. But I think about all this, like, back behind the scenes planning on the enemy side, as far as, there's all these, there's all this, I'm not showboating, but, there's all these, this discussion on the front that we see, right? But then there's all these underlying motivators behind the scenes that we don't really get spoken in the text unless you put it all together,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I posted a link to a Milk and Meat episode when you go through that. But like you said, what if Pharaoh let them go after the first time? But we also know that it was in Yah's plan to magnify his name, not only in Egypt, but amongst the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and all those clans. And we see an example of that in, I think it's 1 Samuel chapter 5 and 6, when the sons of Eli go with the ark to battle. And the reaction of the Philistines is like, oh man, woe unto us. Elohim has come to the battlefield, and we remember what he did to Egypt and to the people in the wilderness, and they were terrified. And I think it's awesome of how the Father wanted to magnify his name in the eyes of all those who was going to be rooted out. And we'll see that in the following passages that we'll read. But yeah, the Father has plans and appointed times for everything. So interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. So here, Exodus 3, for anyone following along at the house. By the way, these all these slides you can access at the video, the link in the description below at our Patreon. This is not behind a paywall, so you can access it for free on our Patreon. It says here in the summary: while Moses was shepherding Jethro's flock at Mount Sinai, the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses within the bush with the appearance of a flaming fire. So, guys, this is a big one right here, right? This is a huge point of an angelic visitation that so many people believe it's actually Yahweh himself, and other groups of people think that it's actually Yeshua showing up as a pre-incarnate visitation, like what they would call a Christophany in academic circles. What do you guys think about this?
Well, just posted in the comment section a video that you did on agency, how the Father uses agency, and we'll see in this chapter, in the next chapter, different layers of agency through from Yah to an angel to Moses down to Aaron, and then a message that was get passed down to the elders even of the people. We see that this is how Yah works throughout the scriptures, and we see Stephen in Acts 7:30 to 35 telling us explicitly that it's an angel in the bush. That Yah sent with Moses to carry this message and the miracles, signs, and wonders.
And if we believe the book of Jubilees, this is the same angel that we've been seeing appear to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all those years.
Exactly. So I wonder if how this angel got that job. I wonder if angels are fighting of who send me. I want to do this. This angel of the presence got this amazing job, but as we know, he also had to witness a lot of iniquity taking place amongst the people of Israel. So he has a great amount of patience sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and the location where he appears to Moses, Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, exactly where the watchers came down. I mean, so much happens there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like people forget in the text that we were reading, when it says the angel of the Lord appeared to him from within the bush in the very beginning, in verse 2. But because the remaining conversation, it says the Lord saw and God called to him from within the bush, people immediately start to think, oh, it must be the Father or it must be Jesus. But again, this is the word Elohim, like we talk about so often, this word Elohim that was translated. The translator makes that decision to capitalize that G out of respect for the righteous rulership that the Father sends through his ministry and spirits, if that was even their motivation. But that seems to be, on best account, if I could give the translator the benefit of the doubt, why they would capitalize this G. But ultimately, it's like the angels. I would believe the angels are extremely intelligent, and it's almost as if they have you guys ever read those books when you were kids where you have alternate endings, and the endings are depending on like which path you choose?
Those cause and effect ones.
Yeah, and there's some video games like this too, like Metal Gear Solid and some different video games where like if you choose a certain path, there's going to be a different ending, right? Which means all the dialogue changes according to what path you've chosen. So these angels are sent down with a general instruction and message. We want you to say this to Moses, but if he responds this way, then you say this. If he responds, he's going to respond this way, so then you would say this. So it's like the Father, these angels are super smart messengers entrusted with not just the general message, the overall message, but also the little rebuttals and responses. So we're going to see in chapter 4, this angel kind of get flustered, where he says his anger burned at Moses with what Moses says at one point. So it's like, I guess the reason I mention this, guys, is these angels are real characters. Like these are real. I don't want to call them people because they're not of mankind. They're angelic kind, but they're real entities with real emotions. He's on a mission and being obedient to the Father to make sure he communicates the message properly and responds properly. And he's there to, facilitate this wonderful event. This is a great responsibility that he's going on doing this mission to meet Moses. And he that means he has to put up with Moses.
Yeah.
And exude the patience of the Torah to deal with what he's about to start, interacting with Moses on a very regular basis. And this Moses character, he's just part and parcel with all the other Israelites. They're very unbelieving. They're very stubborn. They're very, they're not sure of themselves. They came from oppression. Moses is literally a fugitive. He thinks everyone in Egypt wants to kill him. Now he's getting this message to go back there. So he's got some natural hesitations, right? And the angel has to be aware of this, has to like be patient with all this, and it's something. So guys, there's a gentleman that I he was actually the director of the Bible school that I went to many years ago, and he claims in his life that he's had angelic visitations. Okay, some people in life claim this. It's never happened to me. He claims it happened to him. Okay, he claimed that he was mowing his field one day on his tractor, and 3 angels showed up, in the field, and he like stopped the tractor because they basically landed on the ground as if they were walking down this invisible staircase to the ground, and then stopped on the ground in front of him, and he stopped his tractor and got off and walked over to them. And this guy is like 6'6". He's a big guy. He says all the angels were shorter than him. And he says he felt weird about that. So it just also like he claims that he had an actual Christophany, a visitation of a glorified resurrected Jesus, and he was also realized he was taller than Jesus too. And he said, so he kind of felt strange about that, but he said the shortest of the angels looked like he was about 17 years old, and he had blonde hair, and he was clearly in charge of the group of 3 angels, and he was the one that did the speaking and gave the message, because this guy had been praying about his handicapped son, about whether or not he would let him go to a missions trip to Africa with this church that they were a part of. And this was these angels showing up to give him the message to his prayer, to say, yes, in fact, the angels said that we just got back from Africa and made sure that things were prepared so that your son would be safe, and yes, he can go on this trip. And this guy, his name is John, upon hearing this message from the angel, he claims he didn't believe it. Like he was struggling to understand it, because he knew how much care and attention his son needed. And he was worried about an American being kidnapped in a hospital, right? Especially in a handicap situation, right? He literally can't even run away. So he said when he heard the angels tell him this, he said, "Are you sure?" And he said the angel visibly got mad, like puffed up, bowed his chest, and he repeated himself, but with like gritted teeth. He said, "I just told you I got back from there, and it's okay." So like it's this awkward moment where then John then kind of got afraid, because he's like, "Ooh, I just ticked off this angel, like I just saw this dude fly in the sky, come down to where I am, as if gravity doesn't matter to him, or the downward pull that we falsely call gravity doesn't matter to him." And he then I just didn't believe him at first, right? And we're going to see the same type of thing over and over and over again with this particular angel that has been sent to help these Israelites get out of their oppression, get into a better place, step into the promises of God. And God does the same thing that we're going to see later with this angel, the same angel that we get introduced here in chapter 23, where God's like, "I'm going to send him ahead of you." Yeah. Right. And so that means that I don't know what work these angels already did in the land of Canaan to kind of prep the way, because the Israelites didn't even get there until 40 years later. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is there's like all this activity that we don't see happening on our behalf all the time. And some of it is happening to set things up that we, as in our little mortal lives, don't even step into for years later. But the Father's got this whole crew of servants that he sends out to prepare the way for us ahead of time.
It's amazing. It almost sounds like with that story that you just said, the testimony, and this what we see in Exodus 3, that being stiff-necked and disobedient is almost like a shock to angels, because they've seen the Father in a greater capacity than we have, and they're like, I just show you these miracles, and you're not believing me. And maybe also the angel knew ahead of time that the Father said that Moses can answer this way or this way, and he sort of hoped that Moses would be obedient immediately. And it's like, well, praise Yah, I've already, Yah's already sent an angel to get your brother Aaron here, but I was hoping that you would not be this coward. But the Father is patient with us and meets us where we're at most of the time. Unless we're deep in sin, then shape up.
Look at even what he says, and Moses says in verse 13, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them what you tell me to say," right? So he's not even agreeing at this point. He's just saying, "All right, let's just say I do what you're telling me." How do I do this then? Like, it's like, bro, I don't really know if this is a situation where you're bargaining on whether or not you're going to do this. Like, I don't know if you understand the gravitas of this moment here, Moses. Like, this isn't a I'm wondering, hey, would you like to do this? No, the angel's showing up saying God's telling you to do this. So like, it's just so fascinating to me, the mindset.
Yeah, it's bold, you know. You're barefoot standing in front of a burning angel and you're questioning him. It's like, that's insane.
Yeah, and that's part and parcel with the description in the Psalms for ministers of the angels being considered flaming fire.
Yes.
So this is consistent with the description of angels. So just real quick in the summary is while Moses was shepherding Jethro's flocks at Mount Sinai, the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses from within the bush, the appearance of a flaming fire. The angel of the Lord, speaking on behalf of Yahweh, this is the agency part, introduced himself as the God of Moses' forefathers in the covenant. Now, what's interesting about this is that if we did take this word Elohim for how the Hebrews used it, then that would make perfect sense. What we read back in Genesis 35 and Genesis 36 and all these other places where Jacob spoke about the God of his father Isaac that he went to and ministered on behalf of at this altar at Bethel, that this is the God that was going to be with him, the Elohim, the ministering ruling angel that was going to be with him and protected him throughout his life. So this would make perfect sense. But yes, we understand that this particular Elohim was sent by the Father on behalf of the Father. So it's as if the Father is also there looking after you too.
Mhm.
If that makes any sense. So this is how they would have commonly understood this language to be used. Yahweh, through the angel, informed Moses that he had heard the cry of the oppressed Hebrews and would rescue them and take them to the land of promise to their forefathers in the covenant. Yahweh instructed Moses to go in to inform the brethren, the Israelites, to leave with Moses to go worship Yahweh on Mount Sinai. Yahweh also instructed Moses to speak with Pharaoh for the release of the Israelites, and Moses was told the Egyptian king would refuse, and Yahweh would compel him by striking him in Egypt with plagues. Some translations say wonders, but it's that we all know the rest of the story, what happens. The Israelites were promised to be given favor in the eyes of the Egyptians who would give them their wealth before they exited Egypt, and we see this, I believe, in chapter 13. So this is interesting that, and this is the part that I guess just really speaks to me, is that how many times so far we've gone all the way through Genesis in our Torah portions. We're here in the first few chapters of Exodus. How many times does the Father show up and tell these men of faith everything that's going to happen before it happens?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
even to the point of like, oh, and by the way, when you tell your Israelite elders and brethren, they're not going to believe you. So here's what you're like. We're going to read that in the next few chapters. Here's what you got to do to respond to them because they're not going to believe you. And then, Pharaoh's not going to believe you either. So I've got plans for that. And like he just tells them every step of the way, so that this isn't so that as it's coming true and he's following out, it's not really blind faith at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's some of the most amazing parts of understanding the gospel of the kingdom, is knowing that the Father has never required people to have blind faith. He told them every step of the way from Adam, and that's why as we're seeing things escalate in the times we're living in right now, it's like just like the Father said, right? And that gives me not only hope but encouragement and boldness to keep proclaiming the gospel, knowing that even people that don't know him can see that things are changing, and the harvest is plentiful, but we need more laborers. So we should really be encouraged by this, because the Father has never required us to walk in blind faith. And my heart mourns for a lot of people in mainstream church, because when I was in it, they it was more of like, just have faith, just believe in the Father, and I didn't understand the word, and I was like deeply praying to get to know the Father, because the word made no sense to me. But now that it makes sense, it's so much hope. Because we can see, and I think Brother Adam in the roundtable yesterday read from Sirach chapter 2, where it says, "Consider the men of old. Has anyone ever placed their trust in the Father and been confounded or abandoned? No one ever." And we can see that, and that has been true. That will be true in our lives too. So just be encouraged, everyone. The Father is so good.
Yeah.
So we have someone in the chat. Carl is asking, how do we properly explain agency? It definitely helped me get past the angel of the Lord being Yeshua, but I'm not good at explaining this. Well, sister, I would encourage, Hannibal did drop a link earlier in the live chat to one of the videos that I did on this. See if I can find it. Yeah, if you drop it again, I guess I'll post it. But this video here, I go through this whole concept with these verses that we're reviewing right here as well. And I explain the different concepts of agency. I even talk about it in Revelation chapter 1 as well. But the idea is that it's just a representative for you. So we do this in our modern day life. Say like basically anyone under the appointment of the president who goes out and speaks for the president on behalf of his policies and his laws, like the Secretary of State, they're supposed to know what the United States president thinks on issues and can respond to them. And they have the authority to enact some sort of, official decision, basically, on behalf of the president. So this is just a very common. I mean, you would also grant. It's like some people in a legal term would call it power of attorney. You'd also say, even in a more small modern example, it's just having someone that has servants, and he sends his servants to do what he needs to have done, and that servant has been given the authority to make those decisions. Even something as simple and mundane as having a chef who would go out. If you have a personal chef, you told him what you like. Well, he has the authority to go out and get the ingredients at the grocery store with your credit card, come back and make that food for you. You didn't tell him every single ingredient to put in or how much or everything, but no, he knows to come back and do well for you by the authority that you gave him. So it's just simply agency. It's just the idea that you're rolling in someone else's authority. They trust you with the message or with the task, and then you're working as a team together. But of course, Yahweh is at the top of that authority structure. So, Nick, anything in chapter 4 that stuck out to you before we go on to, or chapter 3 before we go on to chapter 4?
No, I think we nailed it there.
Cool. Well, Hannibal, do you want to pick up chapter 4?
Absolutely.
All right, brother.
All right, Exodus chapter 4. Then Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to my voice? For they may say, Yahweh has not appeared to you." And Yahweh asked him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. "Throw it on the ground," said Yahweh. So Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. "Stretch out your hand and grab it by the tail," Yahweh said to Moses, who reached out his hand and caught the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This is so that they may believe that Yahweh, the God of their father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Furthermore, Yahweh said to Moses, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, his hand was leprous, white as snow. "Put your hand back inside your cloak," said Yahweh. So Moses put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored, like the rest of his skin. And Yahweh said, "If they refuse to believe you or heed the witness of the first sign, they may believe that of the second. But if they do not believe even these two signs or listen to your voice, take some water from the Nile and pour it out on the dry ground. Then the water you take from the Nile will become blood on the ground." "Please, Lord," Moses replied, "I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and tongue." And Yahweh said to him, "Who gives man his mouth, or who makes the mute or the deaf, or the sighted or the blind? Is it not I, Yahweh? Now go, I will help you as you speak, and I will teach you what to say." But Moses replied, "Please, Lord, send someone else." Then the anger of Yahweh burned against Moses, and he said, "Is not Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and he is now on his way to meet you. When he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You are to speak to him and put the words in his mouth. I will help both of you to speak, and I will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you. He will be your spokesman, and it will be as if you were God to him. But take the staff in your hand, so you can perform signs with it." Then Moses went back to his father-in-law Jethro and said to him, "Please, let me return to my brothers in Egypt to see if they are still alive." "Go in peace," Jethro replied. Now Yahweh had said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who sought to kill you are dead." So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and headed back to Egypt. And he took the staff of God in his hand. Yahweh instructed Moses, "When you go back to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders that I have put within your power, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then tell Pharaoh that this is what Yahweh says: Israel is my firstborn son, and I told you to let my son go so that he may worship me. But since you have refused to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son." Now at a lodging place along the way, Yahweh met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched it to Moses' feet. "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me," she said. So Yahweh let him alone. When she said bridegroom of blood, she was referring to the circumcision. Meanwhile, Yahweh had said to Aaron, "Go and meet Moses in the wilderness." So he went and met Moses at the mountain of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron everything Yahweh had sent him to say, and all the signs he had commanded him to perform. Then Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the Israelites. And Aaron relayed everything Yahweh had said to Moses, and Moses performed the signs before the people, and they believed. And when they heard that Yahweh had attended to the Israelites and had seen their affliction, they bowed down and worshipped.
Thank you, brother. Okay, guys. So chapter 4. Chapter 4. A lot going on here. So that moment I was talking about, Moses was like, "No, I can't do this. Choose someone else." and the and the angel's like, "Oh, come on,
Yeah.
this guy." So this is one of the first moments we see the anger of the Lord striking up with these encounters because of just the unbelief. So Nick, what are some thoughts you had from reading this, brother?
It reminds me of Genesis 18, when Abraham is pleading with God. Well, what if there are 50 in the land or 10 in the land?
Yeah.
It reminded me of that, but also in 24, verse 24 of Exodus 4, it just glazes over, which I didn't really notice this before about 6 months ago. Now at a lodging place along the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched it to Moses' feet. It's just, boop, all right, never mind, I'm not going to kill him. On to the next one.
Yeah, some of the translations say she threw it at his feet. This particular one says she touched it to his feet. I don't know if there was a big difference in that, or if that was if there was something significant to that, whether it was just thrown at him in anger, or if she intentionally did it for some reason. I don't really see any explanation, but the book of Jubilees does expound on this particular moment here to explain that it was Satan who came to accuse Moses, or came to, it was basically accusing Moses of transgressing the covenant by not circumcising Gershom, and so therefore was trying to basically kill Moses via asking the Lord to exact justice on Moses for transgressing the covenant that whole time. So this is why this little moment, it's a very poor description in the account of Genesis as for why this is happening here. But ultimately, it was what I would think is this actual same angel that met Moses to carry out this vengeance, but then it was Zipporah who finally did this. And it makes me think that because of our actions, and this is just some speculation, guys, as far as just the natural the natural back and forth that you'd see between a husband and wife who disagree over a topic, right, is that it seems like she knew exactly what to do and why that this was happening, and she's the one that took the knife and did it, because it's almost as if they've had this conversation previously, and I could see if Moses was raised by his Levite parents for 21 years, he understood circumcision as an eternal covenant given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Whereas Zipporah, being from Midian, may not have been practicing that.
Yeah.
So I could see that he marries her and there's this conflict about, no, I don't want to do that to my child, and then he's like, well, but this is part of the covenant. We're supposed to. And she's like, no, I'm not going to let you do this to my child until it gets real. And she realizes, okay, there's this ridiculous powerful angel. You are transgressing the covenant. He wants you to go and do this mighty act and bring your people out of the hand of this incredibly powerful ruler. Everything's getting real. And this is probably just rolling around in the back of her mind all these years. Moses has told me this is part of the covenant, that I'm supposed to do this. And it doesn't seem like her father Jethro is fully on board with Yahweh being the only true God until Exodus 18, because of what he actually says.
Exactly.
So.
And we, unfortunately, we see something similar in today's society, where it's usually mothers that are more against the covenants of circumcision than men. That has been my experience, at least. And of course, I understand why, because of all the programming that we've been fed. Even I, as I came into Torah, and I asked the Father, you have to change my mind about the circumcision thing. It doesn't make any sense to me. And thankfully, I took my time going through the Word, and that's why, in Acts 15, it's not supposed to be the thing that you start doing when you jump into the covenant, because it comes with growing in faith and obedience to the Father, and as He changes your heart and you can see His promises being true, now you want to partake in that physical sign of the covenant that you belong to Him, right? And it's a sign of what's about to happen in the resurrection, like Ezekiel 44 says, right? That nobody uncircumcised in heart or in flesh will enter into His temple. So, we'll see. Even the Hebrews and Moses, nobody is, not liable to having issues with some commandments. even some that we might think are easy sometimes. But the
Mhm.
Father is merciful, and
Yeah.
she immediately knew, like you said, what was up, what was wrong, and she just immediately acted. And a flint knife, and I did some research a while back, and apparently flint is like the second most sharpest item that you can have, like the sharpest that you can find naturally in nature. We see the same thing in Joshua, right, when they crossed the Jordan, when they cut off the foreskins and they use flint knives. So I don't know if the men were just built differently back then, because it seemed like they they could handle it pretty easily compared to now.
You couldn't even make a movie about this. Like, you can't make a short skit, like a short film, you know? Think about the chaos of this moment. Like, all you see in the short film is the devil just cackling, the angel of the Lord like begrudgingly walking over to Moses, you know, like with his sword drawn out. Moses freaking out, and Zipporah just runs in the background and just throws up the cloak of Gershom, and then you're just like, what is going on in this scene? What like, what is happening? Like, it's just, yeah, goodness, I can't even imagine. And then of course the other son, I don't know, I can't remember his name right now, but Gershom's brother, what's he thinking just sitting there watching all this happen? Like, what is happening? What are we about to get into? We were just chilling, being shepherds in the desert, living a boring life, and then suddenly my dad comes home with this crazy story, and now we got all this, and and it's just yeah, oh man, I can't even imagine their perspective. So so yes, Moses asked the angel. Okay, so Moses was told to use his staff and his hand as signs to the Israelites to prove the angel of the Lord truly appeared to him. I thought this was interesting. Like, I understand the staff. I I guess I understand the idea of put your hand in your vest, your cloak, and bring it out, and then you got leprosy, and show that you can get instant healing. That would be a pretty amazing sign. Someone in the chat was asking, well, if he became leprous, does that mean he was unclean? Well, even if he was unclean, that doesn't matter. He's not presenting an offering to the temple or anything, so he's not. This isn't under the same context of not being unclean and coming before the Father's temple. And of course, he's healed instantly anyway. So the whole point of this was to show him the ability that was given to him as a sign that this message was from Yahweh. And it just makes me think of the Masonic hand sign where they put their hand in their vest.
Same.
And we know that the roots of that religion comes from ancient Egypt. And so I wonder if that has any kind of like, I don't know that ritual with the Masons. I don't know what it's supposed to mean to them. The hidden hand, where they put half of it in their vest. But I just wonder, I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I had the same thought. It seemed just like that. Maybe you should have was it Secret to Saturn, the YouTube?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should ask him. You might know.
Yeah, it's almost as if, how the rest of the plagues of Egypt seem to relate to some of their gods, is like the Father showing mastery over those gods and how he's turning them, the attributes of those animals and those insects and different characters and the beetles against the Egyptians, instead of them worship them in reverence and thinking that they were for them. He's turning them against them. And I'm wondering if this is some other little nod that the Egyptians would have known that, oh, wait, what's he doing this? He's doing our signal. But then he's like, oh, it's showing me I'm going to be leprous. I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah, you want to worship frogs? Here's some frogs.
Yeah. I mean, it brought to remembrance Leviticus 14 and 15 talking about leprosy and the plague. And I think in last year's Torah portion, and I sent it a link in the live stream, you went through it pretty thoroughly. And it seems to be a sign of coming in contact with a holy God, Yah, while being in a state of uncleanness. And, maybe it's both, having the hand sign of the Masons, but also showing that what comes out is, contact of a deity that is holy, unlike the deities that they're worshiping. And maybe because they had so many angelic visitations back then, compared to now, maybe the plague was something that the Egyptians were very familiar with. Like, oh, you've been in contact with the Most High, just like we see in 1 Samuel chapter 5 and 6 when they take the Ark of the Covenant and they start having tumors and all these plagues come upon them, and they know immediately, like, okay, this is because we're in contact with something holy and we're unclean. So maybe that was the sign.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good thought. I like that. It's probably much more logical than some sort of subtle nod to their secret societies. Who knows? But But yeah, I've always been kind of baffled by that particular sign. I get the staff thing because the staff represented authority, represented the teachers of the elders of the people. It was, I get that concept. But yeah, Moses asked the angel of the Lord to send someone else because he was poor in speech. So very fascinating to me that he's just like, nope, I'm not the guy you want. I am not the deliverer you're looking for. And then the angel just gets mad. And he's like, yeah, well, get your brother. You're still going, but just get your brother and take him with you. So this is like, it makes me wonder, was Aaron always meant to do this? I don't want to get into predestination or anything, but just makes you wonder.
I think Aaron was supposed to be the high priest regardless, but he could definitely have been included in another way or later in the story.
That's true.
But the father, that's what I speculated in the previous chapter, that maybe the angel knew that there were these options, and the father said Moses can say this or say this, and you reply accordingly depending on what he says, and sort of hoping and rooting for Moses to just be brave, Moses, just go out, I'll be with you. And he hears Moses like, well, already sent an angel to Aaron, your brother, and he's on his way. So
yeah.
Moses' father-in-law Jethro. Moses informed his father-in-law Jethro he was leaving for Egypt. Kind of a interesting little point because Jacob did not do that with Laban. This is kind of a little bit, that understanding there. And then on the way, Zipporah circumcised Gershom to save Moses' life. We chatted about that. Aaron met up with Moses along the way, and they both went to Goshen and assembled the elders of the tribes of Israel for Moses to relay the message and perform the 2 signs that validated his commission. So that way they would believe him. That would have been an interesting conversation to see, be a fly on the wall, because of their oppression and what's going on, their mindset at the time, and that just would have been interesting. I wonder if some of them took it with joy, others took it with anger, think they're being conned. How many of them truly remembered Moses? There's a lot going on there. But guys, real quick, I have a special little thing I want to share at this point after this particular chapter. That hopefully it will encourage you because it has to do with this particular chapter. This is actually a short story that I wrote about this moment in Exodus 3 and 4. So we'll play this in just be a few minutes here. The sun was setting, and a cold desert wind pushed hard against the shepherd's body as he appeared on the small hill near his home. He leaned forward to gain stability in the gusting air. His staff slid through his calloused, sun-hardened fingers. Sand scraped inside the cloth wrapping his head, past his cheeks, bouncing off his ears and tumbling down in his shoulders. He kept his head down to shield his eyes. He watched with every step, his feet vanish and reappear underneath his ankle-length garment. His feet were still tingling from the moment, from the ground. His mind was overwhelmed with the events of the day, which only made him study his feet. They were white and diseased, his whole body was, for a moment, but then no longer. It was a baffling ordeal. His wife waved from the entrance of a series of large tents. She stood watching him, her hands on her hips, her hair tossed sideways by the unrelenting desert wind. How was he going to explain what happened? She would never believe him. He barely believed it, and he was there. Then there was that snake and that ground. His wife was so loving and so positive, but he imagined this was beyond her patience, beyond her support. Essentially, he would be telling her of his death, or so he feared. How would she respond? How would she worry? How could that even be possible? How could any of it be possible? The shepherd's thoughts raced and his heart ached, anticipating the look in her eyes, the reaction of his 2 sons. He would be going directly into danger, and he would need her support, more than he knew. "Your brother's here," his wife announced, drawing back the tent entrance. "Thank you, dear, I know." The shepherd entered the tent to see his brother and his wife's father sitting near the back of the second tent. He kept his head down, allowing his eyes to adjust to the darkened room as he removed his outer coverings and shook the sand from his clothes. He carefully placed his staff against the support post, staring at it for a moment. "Why'd you bring your staff inside?" his wife asked. "From today forward, we will keep it inside," the shepherd explained. Then he sat on the small stool near the tent entrance to wipe clean the sand from his feet. His mind fell into the memories of the afternoon, bewildered, amazed. His feet were so smooth now. That ground. It must have been that ground, the shepherd thought to himself. The calloused, rough underside of his feet were now soft and sensitive, like the feet of a small child raised in a palace. Jethro, his wife's father, was reclining against a large pile of blankets and pillows, stoking a small fire at his feet with a long stick. The frail old man carried the conversation, yet his lips barely moved. Underneath the darkened skin of his wrinkled throat, his bulging Adam's apple bounced with every word. Across the room sat the shepherd's brother, having recently arrived from the great city of the wolves. He looked over his shoulder at his younger brother entering the tent. He was instructed to make the journey out to this desert land by the same cause, yet unknown to either he or his brother. It had been many months since his last visit. The shepherd ducked his head under the tent supports as he made his way across the first tent. He was still lost for words. His heart leaped in his chest at the thought of retelling the events of the day. His mind burst with possibilities, things too great to explain with his feeble words. He was never good with his words. He knew of this day from his forefathers, yet never knew he would be part of its coming. Why is my brother here? Does he know as well? This couldn't be a coincidence, he thought as he paced before them. Maybe he had an experience like mine. If not, will they think I've lost my mind? This ground moves under my feet like it should, but not as earlier. He stood at an angle behind his seated brother and reclined father-in-law, trading curious looks between them. His indecisive grin was too much for Jethro. What is this? Your brother's traveled 3 days to see you. Aren't you going to speak to him? The shepherd shook his head, trying to focus on the present. His mind was surging with a mixture of joy and wonder. Forgive me, my day was unlike any other I've ever had, the shepherd replied. He sat on the ground between the two men, crossing his legs and staring at his feet. Your eyes told me something strange. What happened out there today? His wife asked as she stepped up behind him. She bent down and handed him a clay cup with water. The shepherd took a small drink and closed his eyes as he swallowed the refreshing liquid. His brother looked up at his wife with concern. The room was silent, except for the sound of the limbs crackling in the fire. 4 nights ago I had a strange experience. I had to come see you. What is going on? His brother asked, placing his hand on the shepherd's shoulder. The shepherd motioned to his wife. Come sit down next to me, dear. I need to share something with all of you. He reached up to take hold of his wife's hand and helped her sit down next to him. Aaron, I knew you were coming to visit me today. Before I returned here, I knew. Something happened to me today. Something beautiful. I am. He was. The shepherd laughed. The voice was so beautiful. So very beautiful. Whom did you speak with today? His wife asked quickly. Fire, he blurted, followed by a strange chuckle. Well, someone specifically full of fire, radiating, shining. He didn't give his name, but only the name in which he spoke. The ground was alive. I could feel it, Zipporah. It was alive. The shepherd lost his words as tears streamed from his eyes. How could anyone choose me? I'm not worthy. I am not innocent. He looked down, overcome with emotion. Jethro smiled, casting glances to Aaron and his daughter. His wife placed her arm around his waist and her left hand on his leg. Take your time, my love. Brother, yes, take a minute. Gather your words and tell us what happened, Aaron said patiently. The shepherd wiped his eyes and looked up at the new skin on the bottom of his feet. Glowing in the light of the small fire, his eyes then watched the fire, its heat consuming the contents, throwing ashes to the side. How could fire burn like that? It is too wonderful. Nothing was consumed, but yet the daylight was ashamed. The shepherd said softly, Zipporah, my love, where are the boys? They're still tending to their herds, she answered. Tell me, what is this about? Aaron, we will be leaving with you to go back to the city. I need to speak with the elders of our people, the shepherd said. Moses, if they find you, they will kill you. You can't return to Egypt, Zipporah said, her voice cracking with fear. We must. I met him today. Who, Moses? Who put this idea in your head? Whom did you speak with? Aaron said excitedly. The God of our fathers, brother. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God that heals the diseased, the God that hears the cry of the oppressed, the God of promise, the God that redeems the ground, that sets fire within a thing yet does not destroy it. He has set a fire within me. The God that knows my name. He knew me. He called me, Moses revealed, his voice erupting with passion. He continued staring into the fire, his eyes glistening with tears. Brother, are you talking about? Aaron started. I am, Moses interrupted. I am that I am, the being above all, the creator of heaven and earth, told me today to go to my people and have Pharaoh release them. As he has remade my feet, he has remade my heart, even my purpose. How will the elders believe you? How do you believe Pharaoh will grant you this audacious request? Aaron questioned. Moses chuckled and looked up at his brother with a wild smile. Hand me my staff. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you for letting me play that, and hopefully people liked it in the audience watching. And that's just something I wrote many years ago, and I wrote like a little book of short stories, and that was one of them. And I would love in the future. I would love to continue doing stuff like that. I have a lot of other ideas for other stuff, but I just don't have time right now. Got a full plate right now. So, but to me, this is like the most significant moment in Moses's life. That even though the father knew he wanted this to happen, he knew he was going to choose Moses to be the deliverer. He knew all these things were going to happen. It seems like Moses took some convincing and prodding.
Yeah.
You know, like we've read about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They seem like just raring to go. You know what I mean? They seem like, I will follow you, Father. You are the creator of heaven and earth. I get it. You know, let's do it. Whatever you say, let's take him on. You know, but Moses is not quite like that. he's got a lot of baggage. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, you know, at the age of around 80, right? His whole like you said in that story, his whole purpose was changed. And oh man, it's sort of reminds me of the parable of the laborers, right? That receive the same amount of pay at the end of the day, and some might join at the very last hour, and still, you know, they receive the same reward. But us as believers, some of us are, you know, older in age and we've been believers for a long time, or maybe not at all, and sometimes we feel unworthy. You know, why me, right? Oh man, the Father is so good, and he met Moses exactly where he was and gave him what he needed. So it's such an encouraging story. And yeah, your narration skills and your writing is amazing, Sean. I pray that you get time in the future to pursue that, because I think that would really paint a picture. And I'm sort of in the same way when I read the scriptures. I have vivid imagination of what happens and takes place, and I just wish I could put it down on paper, or even make a movie series. But you have that gift, so may Yah give you time in the future.
Yeah, I was inspired when I was a kid. I was like 17 or 18. I first became a believer. I got this book that was, I think it was by author named Rasmussen, was his last name, I think. And the name of the book was Imagine Meeting Him. And it was just a bunch of stories of all the like characters that ran into Yeshua in the Gospels, and how, you know, before their mindset, the after, how they changed, you know, what they were thinking during the interactions with him, and just amazing, you know, just short stories and wonderful creative writing. And but there was this one story that it was about heaven. It was about the kingdom, and how this guy he was a missionary from a tribe, and even though he got into heaven, he was so worried that he didn't fulfill everything that God wanted him to do, because he was trying to get to this other tribe, but he never got there before he died. So now he's in heaven still thinking about this. And then he hears his name being called out in this great crowd of believers that are all talking with each other. And it's from a guy who was from the other tribe that he never got to, that some other missionary had gotten to, that the Father sent. And so like it's just beautiful creative writing. And I was like, man, I would love to write stuff like that to inspire people's faith. That'd be great. So
well, good job, Sean. That was great.
Thanks,
emotional video.
Thank you, appreciate it. I think Nick, are you up next? Do you want to read chapter 5?
Yep, let's do it.
Cool.
After that, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: Let my people go, so that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh replied, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." "The God of the Hebrews has met with us," they answered. "Please let us go on a 3-day journey into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues and with the sword." But the king of Egypt said to them, "Moses and Aaron, why do you draw the people away from their work? Get back to your labor." Pharaoh also said, "Look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you would be stopping them from their labor." That same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their foremen, "You shall no longer supply the people with straw for making bricks. They must go and gather their own straw. but require of them the same quota of bricks as before. Do not reduce it, for they are lazy. That is why they are crying out, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God.' Make the work harder on the men, so they will be occupied and pay no attention to these lies." So the taskmasters and foremen of the people went out and said to them, "This is what Pharaoh says: I am no longer giving you straw. Go and get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your workload will in no way be reduced." So the people scattered all over the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. The taskmasters kept pressing them, saying, "Fulfill your quota each day, just as you did when straw was provided." Then the Israelite foremen, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over the people, were beaten and asked, "Why have you not fulfilled your quota of bricks yesterday or today, as you did before?" So the Israelite foreman went and appealed to Pharaoh. "Why are you treating your servants this way? No straw has been given to your servants, yet we are told, 'Make bricks.' Look, your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people." "You are slackers," Pharaoh replied. "Slackers. That is why you keep saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.' Now get to work. You will be given no straw, yet you must deliver the full quota of bricks." The Israelite foremen realized they were in trouble when they were told, "You must not reduce your daily quota of bricks." When they left Pharaoh, they confronted Moses and Aaron, who stood waiting for them. "May the Lord look upon you and judge you," the foreman said, "for you have made us a stench before Pharaoh and his officials. You have placed in their hand a sword to kill us." So Moses returned to the Lord and asked, "Lord, why have you brought trouble upon this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went down to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not delivered your people in any way."
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate
Yeah.
the foreman. I love that this random dude, the foreman. You know, he's like, "I'm gonna go see Pharaoh and get this sorted out." You know, like
Yeah.
this guy. You know, we don't even get his name. He's just like, and then of course a little detail that sticks out to me so strongly, and I don't know why, is that it says that in verse 20, when they left Pharaoh, they confronted Moses and Aaron, who stood waiting to meet them. So that means Moses and Aaron are kind of like in the know that this had happened to the Israelite workers, and that this increased oppression was taking place, and that they're like kind of I can just kind of see them standing outside of whatever area they're in after the foreman gets out of speaking with Pharaoh, and he comes out into the hallway and he like looks at Moses and Aaron. He's like, "This is your fault, guys. What do you? How dare you put us, in this trouble? How dare you just make it worse for us, And so as we're gonna see it, there's some time that has happened here. This is not happening just like over a day or two. Like this, there's time that's going by. I don't know how long. But I guess this is why Moses says this at the very end to this angel. He's like, "Well, you haven't done what you said you're going to do. Like, what's going on here?" So I guess we'll pick up next week with chapter 6. It seems like a cliffhanger right now, but we'll pick up next week, and then we'll kind of get further into this as things start to progress. And as the angel promised Moses earlier, there's this compulsion is about to start to be pressed onto the Pharaoh to let them go, and all the different ways that compulsion happens to compel him to let him go. So, because he's going to take some arm twisting for sure. But what are you guys' thoughts on this chapter?
Well, in the beginning of Exodus 5, verse 3, we get a further clarification of the definition of worship. And we see two different types of worship in the previous chapter, both in verse 23, where the father tells Pharaoh to let Israel, my firstborn son, go, that he might worship me. And then we see at the end of that chapter 4 in 31, that the elders bow down and worship before Moses. So, that word can be used in terms of reverence, and then also bringing forth sacrifices and gifts and offerings. And that is only reserved for the father. And there's a lot of people that are anti-sacrifices of any kind, even peace offerings, and this is what the Father calls worship, right? So just clarification that it's not something evil. It's not something that came after they sinned with the golden calf in Exodus 32, but it's, as we've been going through the Torah portions, it's from the beginning. This is how we fellowship with the Father and come back in right standing if we have transgressed any part of the covenant. So
good point.
Yeah.
It's they all knew the definition, and we'd already seen this being done by all the forefathers before them throughout Genesis. Whenever they built an altar somewhere and sacrificed to the Lord, they were worshiping Yahweh. So it's a great point, brother. Here in chapter 5, as a quick breakdown, Moses and Aaron presented themselves to Pharaoh to ask him to let the Israelites go celebrate a feast in the wilderness. This is what Nick was mentioning from a few chapters back in chapter 3. This is what the angel announced at the beginning, right? As you'll tell Pharaoh, you need to go celebrate this feast. They were all familiar with religious feasts, even the Egyptians, right? So they all knew this concept. It wasn't foreign to the Pharaoh. Obviously, the Pharaoh just didn't want them celebrating anything to Yahweh. And this feast, by the way, is Shavuot that we see happening in Jubilees 1 and Exodus 24. It's in the middle of the third month. So this is Shavuot, right? So this is already established, as Jubilee 6 tells us. It's actually been kept since the first week of creation. It literally has been it will be kept forever. It's an eternal feast. Doesn't go away just because confused Protestants in seminary think it does. So Pharaoh rejects their request and then removed the supply of straw the Israelites were using to make bricks for Pharaoh, caused them to forge their own straw for production, increasing their oppression. So this is definitely I've been in situations like this where you have managers whom it seems like they're just playing with you. Right? It seems like they give you the impossible task and they just want to see how you're going to respond. Unfortunately, that's not the good-hearted case here. Here, they're given an impossible task because they want them to be under further fear of the authority of the Egyptians over them. And the foreman is right to fear what he's thinking. I mean, just think about the pretext of chapter 1. They're dealing with a society that's been given free reign to kill their babies.
Yeah.
And now they've been forced into slavery, and now they're telling them, oh yeah, by the way, all these bricks that we tell you to make every day, we're not going to give you the ingredients to make them, but we still want you to make them. I would think the same thing as that foreman. Yeah, they're just trying to kill us.
Yeah.
At this point, they're just going to turn their sword on us and actually kill us at this point. Like this is insanity. So therefore, this Israelite foreman, he confronts Moses and Aaron and accused them of causing Pharaoh to further disdain the tribes and trouble them with the threat of harm. Moses asked the angel of the Lord why the oppression of the Israelites had increased and they were not delivered yet. So all this is valid emotional responses from my understanding, from all these characters. And of course, it all comes back to the angel of the Lord having to now continue to go through with the plan, as we're going to see in later chapters. And as like we talked about, as everything is going to unfold as it was initially said to Moses. So why would, on one hand, I can see Moses's response after the foreman came to him and was all upset. I understand why Moses then would go to the angel and say, why haven't you done what you said you're going to do yet? But actually, it's playing out just as the angel already told him he was going to do.
Yeah.
He told him Pharaoh's not going to let you go, So this is already just the message through this angel from Yahweh is being validated every step of the way. And Moses just has to be reminded of that. So,
yeah. Peer pressure and fear. And I can just imagine, Moses and Aaron standing outside eagerly anticipating good news and hearing the foreman say the bad news. And he's like, well, what did Pharaoh tell you guys? Man, it's bad, dude. We're going to have to work even harder. And then Moses goes back to the angel like, hey, man, I'm looking bad here. Help me. But like you said, he told him everything. And I just like verse 2. And it's, this meme out there. I think it's Michael Jordan that said that after I heard this, then it became personal to me. And when Pharaoh says, who is Yahweh? Who's Yahweh? I don't know him. And yeah, it's pretty much in my mind when he heard that, he's like, all right, now it's personal. Now it's, I'm going to give you guys everything. I just, I found it humorous how the Pharaoh probably sat on his throne. Is like, who's I don't care. Big mistake.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, all right, let's jump into one of our companion passages real quick. We have Jubilees 46 And whose turn is it to read? Is it mine?
I think so.
I think so.
All right, so I'll jump into Jubilees 46 real quick. It came to pass that after Jacob died, the children of Israel multiplied in the land of Egypt, and they became a great nation. And they were of one accord, so that brother loved brother, and every man helped his brother. And they increased abundantly and multiplied exceedingly, 10 weeks of years, all the days of the life of Joseph. There was no Satan nor any evil all the days of the life of Joseph, with which he lived after his father Jacob. For all the Egyptians honored the children of Israel all the days of the life of Joseph. And Joseph died being 110 years old. 17 years he lived in the land of Canaan, and 10 years he was a servant, and 3 years in prison. And 80 years he was under the king, ruling all the land of Egypt. And he died and all his brethren and all that generation. And he commanded the children of Israel before he died that they should carry his bones with them when they went forth from the land of Egypt. And he made them swear regarding his bones, for he knew that the Egyptians would not again bring forth and bury him in the land of Canaan. For Macamaron, the king of Canaan, while dwelling in the land of Assyria, fought in the valley with the king of Egypt and slew him there, and pursued after the Egyptians to the gates of Hermon. But he was not able to enter, for another, a new king, had become king of Egypt, and he was stronger than he. And he returned to the land of Canaan, and the gates of Egypt were closed, and none went out, and none came in. Joseph died in the 46th Jubilee in the 6th year, in the second year. Let me say this. Joseph died in the 46th Jubilee in the 6th week in the 2nd year, and they buried him in the land of Egypt, and all his brethren died after him. And the king of Egypt went forth to war with the king of Canaan in this 47th Jubilee. And in the 2nd week in the 2nd year, the children of Israel brought forth all the bones of the children of Jacob, except for the bones of Joseph, and they buried them in the field in the double cave in the mountain. That's probably the same double cave we read about in Genesis, the double cave of Machpelah that Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite. And most of them returned to Egypt, but a few of them remained in the mountains of Hebron, and Amram, your father, remained with them. The king of Canaan was victorious over the king of Egypt, and he closed the gates of Egypt. And he devised an evil device against the children of Israel of afflicting them. And he said unto the people of Egypt, Behold, the people of the children of Israel have increased and multiplied more than we. Come and let us deal wisely with them before they become too many, and let us afflict them with slavery before war come upon us, and before they too fight against us. Else they will join themselves unto our enemies and get them up out of our land, for their hearts and faces are towards the land of Canaan. And he set over them taskmasters to afflict them with slavery. And they built strong cities for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramesses. And they built all the walls and all the fortifications which had fallen in the cities of Egypt. And they made them serve with rigor. And the more they dealt evilly with them, the more they increased and multiplied. And the people of Egypt abominated the children of Israel. So there we have it, guys. There's a lot of unique details kind of layered in this supplementary passage with Exodus chapter 1 through 1, basically.
Mhm.
Giving you that connecting information from the death of Joseph leading into the political changes, the new people that come to power. And man, what are your first thoughts, guys?
And first thought is that there was no Satan nor any evil all the days of the life of Joseph.
Yeah.
In verse
Yes.
2, that must have been unimaginable, because it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so great point, right? So let's think about this for a minute.
Yeah.
What I know, a lot of people like to just brush aside the idea of Satan by saying, "Oh, well, that just means Hasatan just means adversary."
No.
Okay, so was it just the fact that there was no adversarial conditions, there was no internal strife within the politics of Egypt that challenged Joseph's rule, that there was no outward show of civil discord and hatred from between the Egyptians and the Israelites? Or is it truly saying that there was no Satan in that region? If Satan's a real entity, if he's a real angel that walks and talks and flies or whatever, does that say that he was not in that region? Or do we think that it's just saying there was no adversarial conditions?
No. I think that just like Jubilees 10 says about these unclean spirits, that they were created for destruction, to cause, calamities, war, sickness, and disease. And we see it all throughout the testament of the 12 patriarchs, that they say that if you cleave to God, if you love him, keep his commandments, then Beliar and none of his minions will have any dominion over you. They will flee from you.
Right.
And we see that specifically in Testament of Issachar, chapter 7, when he talks about, if you love your neighbor like I did, then, Belial will have no rule over you. And we see the same thing in Dan chapter 5, verse 1 to 3. And that is what we see here, brotherly love. And that drives out unclean spirits. They can't associate with people that are following God's commandments and are loving their neighbor. It's just a powerful testimony. And we see the same thing throughout that. Even today, as we're being more and more oppressed, people are going back to the scriptures and really trying to love their neighbors, knowing that we need each other more than ever before. And we're multiplying not only, in terms of numbers, but also, financially and in stability. And even if it's not multiplying in terms of children, we're having more people coming to the faith and having more brothers and sisters joining us. So this is a great encouragement to me that, even in spiritual warfare, which we'll see more in the following chapters, that Satan can't really do anything. If we're walking in God's commandments, we're protected.
Yeah, and we know that, like you mentioned, the unclean spirits gravitate towards that bad behavior, that non-Torah behavior. They're under the authority of Satan, as Jubilees tells us and Enoch tells us. So with that being said, that means they're non-corporeal beings, according to the descriptions of unclean spirits, right? They try to possess other corporeal beings, but they themselves don't have bodies anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But Satan does.
Yeah.
How did ancient Egypt view Satan?
Ra, right?
Worshipped him.
Worship him.
He's their patron god.
Yeah.
So when Joseph comes in, what did we see back in our Torah portions several weeks ago with Joseph being tempted by his master's wife?
Wow.
What was he trying to do, as we read from what was it? What did I read from the Testament of Asher?
Joseph.
The Testament of Joseph, where he was trying to teach her the ways of Yahweh, even though she was throwing herself at him.
Yeah.
So
for 7 years, right?
Right. Yeah. So so that means that Joseph was not afraid, even in the levels of authority within the government of Egypt. He was not afraid to tell those people about his faith, the covenant of Yahweh, the commandments of Yahweh, righteous living. He's talking to an entire culture and people group that worships Satan. So he then comes into power and is honored by the people because of the story that unfolded to save them from famine. And Jubilees follows this up with, and there's no Satan during the days of Joseph's rulership and reign. So that's like crazy to think about. That whatever's going on here in this time that Joseph has huge sway in the administration of Egypt and their government, that there's no Satan, which literally Ra was whom they worshipped. Did he literally show up to them?
Well, they have all these pictures and writings of Ra on his boat, right? So I think they've seen him show up once or twice.
Yeah.
So imagine this from the perspective of the Egyptians. We've got a false god who can present himself at any point for many decades previous, maybe hundreds of years previous, to convince them. This is the same Egypt that just a couple hundred years after the Tower of Babel spawned, from the Tower of Babel, and the nations being dispersed.
Yeah.
From whom Satan was intricately involved with everything going on there in Babel. So they already worshipped Jupiter. So they already know who Satan is this whole time. All the people of Egypt already knew who Ra was. They worshipped him. They thought he was the main god that flew through the sky and showed up on the ground and talked with, I don't know what kind of ceremonies or rituals they had, and if he ever showed up and what that looked like. But we definitely know that the administrators of these lands interacted with them, because there's all these. They literally tell about it. They have all the carvings and pictographs and hieroglyphs. They talk about it. Here's Ra, here's Osiris, here's Anubis, here's the servants coming to bring them food and coming to pamper them and coming before them with judgments and coming to serve them. Right? Here's the Nephilim giants helping them build all their statues and obelisks and everything. Like, just put your mind. Hopefully for the people listening, I just want you to understand the mindset of what's happening here in the backdrop. This isn't just some remote country area where the children of Israel are living, and Joseph just occasionally is in the main city 100 miles away and just comes to visit from time to time. Guys, they're in the thick of ancient Israel or ancient Egypt. They're in the heart of the kingdom of Satan. And the Father, this is Psalm 23 if you've ever seen it. I will set before a table in the presence of your enemies. Like, he, more than a table, he gave them an entire land to live in, the best of the land, in the heart of the kingdom of Satan. Just think about this for a minute, guys. So if we take this to be, if we believe that angels are real entities, just like the angel showing up here to Moses, well, Satan was a fallen angel. That's a real entity who can physically appear and talk to people, to deceive them, to do whatever, right? Just like he appeared to Yeshua to deceive him. Tried to, anyway. I just think this is a fascinating little perspective that no one really ever mentions when we talk about the story of the Exodus. They're not just some isolated people whom just their neighbors started to oppress them and they came over. Like, it was, they had this amazing perspective that they grew in, where they got to walk in peace while they moved down. I mean, this could okay, I got to slow down. Sorry, guys, I get excited. This could validate why Joseph is so hesitant in Genesis to even go down. I think Genesis 46 and then Jubilees 44 to even go down into Egypt, and he has to have an angel show up to tell him it's okay, because he's going, you want me to do what? You want me to go live in literally the kingdom of Satan, of Ra? I'm good here. Like, I've dealt with these Amorites. I already took over these Amorites. I'm good here. I can stay here. You know what I mean? But you want me to go where they worship Ra, like to the nth degree, and they rule everything, and they're one of the most powerful nations, right now. And like, I can understand Jacob says do that. Okay, I got you. I prepared the way for you. Joseph, I sent Joseph ahead of you. He's metaphorically, he's already went down there with the machete. He's cleared the jungle path for you. You know what I mean? And now you guys can go down there and dwell in safety. And then he promises Jacob, and then after some time, when they start to oppress you, I'll bring my people back up out of there again. So again, he tells them the whole story before it happens.
Yeah, and it's another parallel between Joseph and our Messiah, right? Because when our Messiah comes, Satan will be bound for 1,000 years, and he won't be around at all during the millennial reign. And just another parallel. And I didn't notice it before you went over this passage again. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little moment here. I'm sorry, Nick, go ahead.
Oh no, I was agreeing with Hannibal.
Yeah. I just get fascinated by this, because if we take seriously the idea that Satan's a real character and that he truly showed up to the ancient nations to deceive them, as precedent we see in the scriptures, they built temples to him. They did sacrifices to him. They had rituals associated to worship and honor him. And he was like the main dude in Egypt. And he lost his sovereignty here during Joseph's reign. Like Hannibal mentions, wonderful parallels to the millennial kingdom, but unprecedented in the ancient world, that he would just be literally kicked out of his domain in the presence of the people. Like, that's just, I mean, obviously there's plenty of other nations he could have existed in during this time and continue to deceive and get, perpetrate all of his deceptions and shenanigans. I'm just saying this is fascinating, because like, go through the mind of that Egyptian during that 70 years or that 80 years and just think like, okay, so we haven't seen Ra in a long time. Is he still around? Like, what's going on?
Right.
And by the way, we got, this incredibly righteous ruler who doesn't worship the same gods we do. So, I mean, it just makes me wonder, like, so the reason I'm saying all this is because you're getting a testament during this moment of Joseph's life. You're getting an open outward witness of the covenant of Yahweh, the righteous commandments, the behavior therein, that the Egyptians could have adopted during this incredible time of prosperity and peace. But instead, the moment they get a chance, the new ruler comes in, they go back to the ways of Babylon and all the foreign pantheon gods of Egypt. So I just think it's, as far as, the judgment that comes upon the people that we're going to be reading about in following chapters, a lot of atheists do not like this story because they think God's picking on the Egyptian people. And I try to remind them they were complicit. Like we've talked about since we started the Torah portion, they were complicit with the instruction to kill these babies and do infanticide. They had a chance to walk in brotherly love toward the Hebrews, but the moment they're being encouraged to worship false gods and to treat the Hebrews with evil, they do that. So the people and the rulers are both complicit in the judgment that comes upon them. This was their choices. So just something to consider, guys. I just think it's fascinating, personally fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like the cobwebs that developed on the temples to Ra during this time. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah. And something to bring into the modern era, having just wrapped up the Babylon series, which anyone in the audience, if you haven't seen it, you got to check it out on Sean's channel.
Yes.
But my wife sent me this. A shout out to C. Marie, she's in the live chat. But they just announced that they found there's a moon of Saturn, and they're calling it the Death Star moon. And they're saying it might be hosting alien life. So the moon of Saturn, one of the moons of Saturn, they're calling it the Death Star moon, and they're saying there's aliens on it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that a NASA publication? Is that a NASA release?
She sent it to me. It was a Reply link, I believe. So
That's funny.
probably comes from NASA.
That's funny.
So if you guys are not caught up on Investigate Babylon, it's time to get to it.
Yeah, that's also kind of the backdrop of what leads me to this more concrete feeling of, all right, so this Satan character, he's not just something that only the Bible mentions as some sort of arch over spiritual force that never really is a tangible thing. Like, he was interacting with these people.
Yeah.
You know, but apparently during the days of Joseph, he kind of got evicted, you know, from these people, from the Egyptians. So it goes on with Joseph and the other 11 brothers died. By this time, there's a transition. The king of Egypt went to war with the king of Canaan and lost. So then the gates, well, actually, I apologize. This is slightly out of chronological order. The new king, the old king closed the gates after the first battle and restricted travel, but then he went to war against the king of Canaan and lost. The new king feared the children of Israel and imposed slavery on them to diminish their potential for internal conflict and rebellion. And the Egyptians hated the Israelites. So there's this is a huge chapter to help us understand the backdrop of Exodus chapter 1. Guys, I've been talking a lot. I apologize. What are your thoughts on this chapter?
In verse 13, when he mentions that the hearts of the Israelites is faced towards Canaan, that goes back to the land portions given in Jubilees, chapter 8, I believe, and 9 and 10 even, where we see that Shem receives the portion where Yah would dwell. And the promise is given throughout the fathers that you guys will return here. And they probably, as they were trading and hanging out with the Egyptians, and they asked, well, what God are you worshiping? And, why do you believe in him? And they just tell this magnificent story about their God that is just full of love and has promised them this land, like Hebrews 11 said, that he's not ashamed to be called their Elohim because he has prepared a place for them, right? And sometimes I've noticed in my life that the hope that we have can be sort of can make people angry sometimes because people can get addicted, unfortunately, and I've seen this even in the body, to bad news and being in a state of despair. But when you have that hope, and especially to people who are being sort of influenced and oppressed sometimes by unclean spirits, they don't like hearing the gospel news at all. And just having that smile, and I probably as they were seeing the Israelites prospering so enormously in Goshen, and then having this new leader that just oppressing and reinstates, raw worship and everything. And they just see, well, these happy guys are just have their eyes set on Canaan, saying that, this is all that, and the Father is going to give it to us. And I see this being, we'll keep reading in companion passages that you brought on, but I just see it interesting how they knew. And you also mentioned that in the Milk and Meat episode about why did Yah tell them to root out the Canaanites? It's because they already knew that they're in this land by sedition, and the Father is going to give it back to them somehow.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yep. And guys, this actually leads us into our theological rabbit trail. So who was the Pharaoh that oppressed the Israelites? It's a big question a lot of people are asking. Well, we read in Jubilees here that there was this guy named Macmaron, who was the king of Canaan, right? That was at war with Egypt during these times. There's the historical claim of this period, and you guys could take this with a grain of salt. A lot of people disagree with the exact timing. It's not about the exact dates of this claim, but it's about the people, the names of the people that are being claimed. Okay. So it's the history, secular history claims that the Middle Kingdom of Egypt is considered to known as the Third Age in Egypt, less commonly known as the period of reunification, was an era of Egyptian history roughly between 1900 and 1550 BC, encompassing the period between the collapse of the Old Kingdom until the second reunification of Egypt under the 18th dynasty. All very boring stuff, right? Until you get to right here where it says, and at the end of the 12th dynasty in 1700 BC, a large period of chaos and foreign invasions occurred in which the Hyksos, or the Amalekites, conquered much of Egypt around Goshen. So this is where it gets kind of crazy, because this is the Amalekites that we see attacking the Israelites later in chapter 17 after they've come out of Egypt. So this is the story here in Exodus 17, 8 through 12. After this, the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men to go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I'll stand on the hilltop with the staff of God in my hand. Joseph did as Moses had instructed him and fought against the Amalekites, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed. But when he lowered them, Amalek prevailed. When Moses' hands grew weary, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Then Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on each side, so that his hands remained steady until the sun went down. So Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his army with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this on a scroll as a reminder and recite it to Joshua, because I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar and named it, the Lord is my banner. Indeed, he said, a hand was lifted up toward the throne of the Lord. The Lord will war against Amalek from generation to generation. We also see in the book of Samuel, they continue encounters with the Amalekites, but it gives you some indication in this verse of where they existed. So now in verse 1 Samuel 27:8, David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites. From ancient times, these people had inhabited the land extending from Shur to Egypt. So this is going to be from Egypt eastward into the land of Canaan, right? Which is what we read from Jubilees 46, which is this king from the land of Canaan, while dwelling in Assyria, went to war with the king of Egypt. That means that the king of Egypt had traveled all the way across the land of Canaan to the land of Assyria on the other side of the Mesopotamian, or in the Mesopotamian area on the other side of the Euphrates. So they were trying to exert their regional control, and he won that first battle. Then there was a retribution attack from the king of Canaan, and he overcame the king of Egypt, and that was the new Pharaoh that took over after all the Israelite boys had died, and we start the oppression that we see in Exodus chapter 1. So essentially, guys, we've got like Hannibal was pointing out from the chapter in verse 11 of Jubilees 46, is that king knew that the Hebrews had formerly existed in Canaan and had their face set towards Canaan, meaning they intended to go back there. Like I said before, they knew the story. They knew they were there by sedition. They knew they were wrong, and they're trying to cover up for it, and they're trying to continue their sedition in the land, right, without being rooted out, as was promised by Yahweh, right, and declared, and previously alluded to with the authority that Jacob had when he took over the 7 Amorite kings, and had huge control in the land and was considered a great man in the land that nobody messed with. So this is an interesting little dichotomy of why then the father later is just, he's like, I'm done with Amalek, man, forever. They're my enemy forever. You know. So not only are they one of the tribes that is intentionally defiling the agreement made with their forefather Canaan and Noah, validated by the angel that was there in the covenant made after they got off the boat by several decades. Not only are they there dishonoring that covenant that was made and breaking that covenant, they then become physical enemies against Israel by trying to kill and oppress them while they were in Egypt. And then when they get out of Egypt, the remnants. So even though that king was dealt with, and he's there with Israel and all that, so he's there in Egypt, and we're going to read later in chapter 14. The Egyptian army is destroyed in the sea and everything. So even though all the plagues happen, and then the army is destroyed by the Egyptians, as soon as the Israelites are still coming out and they think that they're safe, the Amalekites attack them, which makes perfect sense. If it was formerly their king that was also in Egypt attacking them, it's the same people with the same sentiment, which leads into that continued conflict even up until the days of Saul and David. So what are your thoughts, guys?
Well, when I was researching this, the Hyksos, or the Amalekites, a common translation of that word was conquerors of foreign lands. So it sounds like they were just bullies to everybody. So it's no wonder he said, I'm going to blot them out forever.
Yeah. It's so impression doesn't pay, I guess, if we're going to turn this into a G.I. Joe moment. Knowing is half the battle. So, guys, I appreciate you. Go ahead, Animal.
So sorry, just to add something to that chapter. It's almost like spiritual warfare also, that these Amalekites probably, had Nephilim among them and were just charged with whatever unclean spirits were influencing them. And I sort of like in my life, when you're praying for a breakthrough, don't give up until the enemy is destroyed, right? The enemy is, gone from you, in terms of like, don't stop praying until the prayer has been answered. And I see that as Moses, and then having help from these two men is like a fellowship. Surround yourself with like-minded believers. Not trying to overly spiritualize this passage, but it's the Father giving the message of don't relent until it's over, which we unfortunately see later in Israel's history, that they don't fully root out the tribes around them that wants to hurt them, and it comes back to bite them severely. So
ultimately I just always think of Psalm chapter 2, why do the nations rage in vain? It's just like they absolutely know. It's just like they're rebellious watchers. Like they even say it when they're like, come brothers, let us bind ourselves in mutual imprecations of this oath, that we may not suffer this great sin and the penalty of it by ourselves. You're like, bro, what are you talking about? Like, you're just literally saying, we know we're gonna get in a lot of trouble for this, but come get in trouble with me. Like, this is what are these people doing? Like, I mean, not that I'm perfect, guys. I've clearly made my own transgressions and willful sins in my life that I had to repent for, but just to persist for decades and generations within this, I mean, it just truly, I guess the gleaming little piece of hope that I see from this mentality is people like Rahab and Jericho, where she, even in the midst of all that, amidst a people group that feared the Israelites, knew they were there, fortified their walls and their cities, knew there was going to be conflict, and she's like, guys, can I just be on your side? I don't want to be with these people anymore. Like, I want to reverence the God of Israel. Like, let me just graft in with you, please. There are some clear-headed thinking people that can be just like, I guess it's actually a small testament just to what the Father can do with what we're seeing in our modern life. Like, a lot of us are living in, like, I feel personally like the United States is a modern day version of ancient Egypt. I mean, we've got obelisks everywhere. We've got the Freemasonry everywhere. They're literally rulers that, we got the open portion everywhere, right? We've got the ancient practices of ancient Egypt everywhere in our country. It's literally on our money. And the Father woke me up to his truth, even though I grew up in this culture, so I guess I'm not trying to be too disparaging. I do want to remain positive, but it's just sometimes I don't understand the bad guys at all. I don't understand. It's like, if I'm writing a story, you got to give valid motivation to the bad guys in the story. Otherwise, they're not a good character villain. And some of these guys are reading and they're just so crazy and they're not thinking things through. It's like I'm sitting there going, you guys must be on drugs, because you're not a good villain at this point. Like, you're just literally stereotypical bully, which means stereotypically you're gonna get defeated in the end.
Sort of reminds me when I was young and I did something stupid, and when I tell my mother, it's because my friend did, and she always told me, like, if your friend jumps off a cliff, would you do that too? And in my mind, I was like, yeah, these are my boys. Right? I was being stupid, right? And it sort of feels like the angels in Enoch have the same mindset of, just to show that they're not mankind, but they have friends, they have their lives, they have their houses up in the heavens. And it's like, when some Jaws is like, hey guys, I'm thinking of doing this really dumb thing, like young boys in a playground, and they're just like, oh man, we're gonna get in so much trouble for this, but let's pinky swear that we'll all do this together. So they can't get us all, man. And yeah, did he got all of them out of there quickly. But the evil ones really are stupid. It's like Paul said, their wisdom is darkened completely because of their choices.
Hey guys, while I'm talking, I have some feedback in the live chat that my mic sometimes is dropping out. If you guys are hearing that, like, tell me, raise your hand or something, or interrupt me or whatever. You're welcome to do that, so I can try to adjust my controller over here. I don't if this controller is going out, because it happened a few times last night in my broadcast, and if I need to get a new controller, I just need feedback to know when that's happening.
Yeah, sure. I noticed that.
I don't hear it on my earphones.
Yeah, I noticed that when I make a sound, it usually corrects itself. So I think it might be something with the feedback if you're speaking and no one else is interacting for a while. Okay. But yeah, definitely. Okay.
Well, guys, thank you so much for going down this theological rabbit trail with me. Okay, guys, we have one more chapter here, Mark chapter 12. And whose turn is it to read?
It's me, I think.
All right, brother.
All right, Mark chapter 12. Then Jesus began to speak to them in the parables. A man planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a vine vat, and built a watchtower. Then he rented it out to some tenants and went away on a journey. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect his share of the fruit of the vineyard. But they seized the servant, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent them another servant, and they struck him over the head and treated him shamefully. He sent still another, and this one they killed. He sent many others, some they beat and others they killed. Finally, having one beloved son, he sent him to them. They will respect my son, he said. But the tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. So they seized the son, killed him, and threw him out of the vineyard. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Have you never read this scripture? The stones the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is from the Lord, and is it marvelous in our eyes? At this, the leaders, chief priests, scribes, and elders sought to arrest Jesus, for they knew that he had spoken this parable against them. But fearing the crowd, they left him and went away. Later, they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to catch Jesus in his words. Teacher, they said, we know that you are honest and seek favor from no one. Indeed, you are impartial and teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or not? Then Jesus saw through their hypocrisy and said, why are you testing me? Bring me a denarius to inspect. So they brought it, and he asked them, whose image is this? And whose inscription? Caesar's, they were answered. Then Jesus told them, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. And they marveled at him. Then the Sadducees, who say that there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and questioned him. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife, but no children, the man is to marry his brother's widow and raise up offspring for him. Now there were 7 brothers. The first one married and died, leaving no children. Then the second one married the widow, but he also died and left no children. And the third did likewise. In this way, none of the 7 left any children. And last of all, the woman died. In the resurrection then, whose wife will she be? For all 7 were married to her. Jesus said to them, you are mistaken, because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. When the dead rise, they will neither marry nor be given in marriage. Instead, they will be like the angels in heaven. But concerning the dead rising, have you not read about the burning bush in the book of Moses? How God told him, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. You are badly mistaken. Now, one of the scribes had come up and heard their debate. Noticing how well Jesus had answered them, he asked him, which commandment is the most important of all? Jesus replied, this is the most important. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. Right, teacher, the scribe replied. You have stated correctly that God is one, and there is no other but him. And to love him with all your heart, and with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, which is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that the man had answered wisely, he said, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And no one dared to question him any further. While Jesus was teaching in the temple courts, he asked, how can the scribe say that the Messiah is the son of David? Speaking by the Holy Spirit, David himself declared, Yahweh said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. David himself calls him Lord, so how can he be David's son? And the large crowd listened to him with delight. In his teaching, Jesus also said, watch out for the scribes. They like to walk around in long robes, to receive greetings in the marketplaces, and to have the chief seats in the synagogues and the place of honor at the banquets. They defraud widows of their houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will receive greater condemnation. As Jesus was sitting opposite to the treasury, he watched the crowd putting money into it, and many rich people put in large amounts. Then one poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which amounted to a small fraction of a denarius. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put more than all the others into the treasury, for they had all contributed out of their surplus, but she, out of her poverty, had put in all she had to live on.
Thank you, Hannibal. So we need that. We need them like a mic drop meme every time Yeshua speaks to these guys, because they're just constantly getting put in their place, and they keep coming up to him. They're just a glutton for punishment, apparently. They're just constantly being embarrassed in front of the people as bad teachers who don't know the scriptures, and yet they keep trying. Like, it's just absolute pride. Nick, what are your thoughts on some of the things we just read?
Well, first of all, praise Yah for his son Yeshua. This is great. There's so much meat in this, but you kind of glaze over it if you don't have Enoch and Jubilees to really break down what he's saying. Let's see here. Going up to the top. The first one, the watchtower with the vineyard. I mean, it's just the perfect analogy of our plane. And, well, I don't want to spoil what you're going to talk about in the next bit here, but the way he summarizes so much that we've been told in all of the Torah in such a little amount of words, it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's what an interesting parable to start with, knowing these guys are listening.
Yeah.
And because it says, what does it say here? Verse 6? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Verse 12. Like, they knew that this parable was directed at them. Right? Which the end of the parable means Yahweh's going to show up and kill you guys because you're so horrible.
Yeah.
You're murderous. You're dishonest. You're irresponsible with what he's given you. And he's going to come kill you for your behavior. And, oh, by the way, you're going to kill his son. And this is Jesus speaking to them, who's already claimed to be the Son of God in previous chapters. So, like, he's telling them what they're going to do, and they immediately plot to kill him.
It's insane. They didn't even have, they didn't look amongst each other like, hey, guys, he's speaking about us. Should we maybe stop killing the prophets and the righteous men? Nah, get him. It's insane.
How dare he call us out for what exactly we're trying to do to him? Continue to do it all the more. It's just, what is going on with these people? So,
broods of vipers, sons of
seriously. Hypocrisy to the point where you're not even listening to what he's saying. All you can think about after everything he just said in this parable is, I don't like his tone. I think we should kill him. There's no one in the crowd being like, hey, he just said you're trying to kill him in the parable. And then God's going to kill you because of that. Like, you shouldn't probably try to kill him. What? No, we should kill him. He's a heretic. Like, it's just insane, man. And of course, they obviously can't do it themselves. So they get the Pharisees and the Herodians to try to come and catch him in some more bad doctrines of some sort. And it's just not working out for them. You know what I mean? He just continues to be the amazing righteous example that he was with sound doctrine. There's just this is an incredibly large chapter. There's a lot in here, and maybe we can spur some quick thoughts from the summary here. In Mark 12, Jesus told his disciples the parable of the vineyard, that a man planted a vineyard and hired servants to work it. Those servants betrayed his trust and abused and even killed the owner's messengers and son who were sent to retrieve the harvest. The vineyard owner killed the evil hired servants. The chief priests, scribes, and elders knew the parable was directed at their bad leadership, so they planned to kill Yeshua. It's crazy. The leaders of the people sent the Pharisees and Herodians to catch Yeshua teaching on sound doctrine and challenged him with a question about taxation, which is, I understand if it was like a big disagreement because the Israelites of that time didn't want to be under the subjugation of Rome. But ultimately, like, this isn't something that is going to be. This isn't like a big sticking issue. It only is a sticking issue because the people. I'm guessing this was a common discussion amongst the people, right? Which is like,
Yeah.
we don't want to be under Roman rule. We definitely don't want to pay their taxes. Can we find some loopholes in our law that will be accepted by the Romans to get us out of this taxation? I understand the sentiment of where they're coming from because taxation is theft. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But this, but remember the Judaism, or at least the Pharisees and their ilk and their religious order was accepted by the Romans. So just think about that for a minute. Like and according to other writings, the Romans were implicit with planting one of their people in the priesthood, as far as them choosing someone not from the proper line of Levi or from the line of Zadok. So they're already Roman plants, basically loyal to Rome. And anyone that claims to be the Son of Man during those days means that you're going to also be a king who would have more authority than Caesar. So this was already a threat to Caesar's authority and rulership, just for Yeshua to walk around and say, I'm the Son of Man sent by the Almighty Creator of heaven and earth. Because they actually had shrines to Caesars and worshiped them as little g gods. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of there was a lot of different things going on here. And when it comes to them challenging the taxation system and the money, it was like, it just seems like a weird conversation to me, but it was a point of contention during that day. And this is why we see later the Pharisees later, like 70 years after or 60 years after Yeshua, after persecution increased among the Christians in the 1st century AD, the Pharisees decided to declare publicly to Rome that Christians were not a part of them. And therefore it opened them up for heavy persecution by the Romans as not being an accepted and protected class under the Roman agreement with the Pharisees. So this is where it became extremely bad with the killing and the persecutions of the Christians. So the Sadducees also questioned Yeshua about the details of the resurrection and how marriage relationships will be viewed in the kingdom. That's the famous moment that's parallel to Matthew 22. He basically tells them, you don't know what you're talking about. You know the scriptures. I personally feel that we only get this information given to us from First Enoch, as far as the idea of when we have our glorified bodies and we're made like the angels, are we appointed wives? No. So therefore, the whole premise that these Sadducees are asking this question is not based off scripture. So he has to chastise the Sadducees for not knowing scripture, asking a bad question. He doesn't chastise the people when they ask a bad question. He takes the time to teach them. But this is people that held themselves up as leaders and teachers of the people, the Sadducees. They're not supposed to be asking bad questions. Right? They should know.
The claim of history is that the Sadducees were primarily Levites, and I don't know if it's pretty hard to actually confirm in my research, but it blows my mind that the people who were called to not only copy, preserve the Torah, but teach it diligently to the people are this confused that they don't even believe in the resurrection, which is like such a central part of the gospel message. And they're completely confused. And like you said, in First Enoch 15 and also in Second Baruch 51, we get to know that angels are not given into marriage and that will receive a body like the angels at the resurrection. And this is a good apologetics tool for those who say that Enoch and all these other books are they're not inspired, but Messiah seems to be quoting from them and bringing up topics that are only explained in these books that are not in the Protestant canon.
Yeah, it really is. Yeshua a scribe tried to test Yeshua, asking him which of the commandments was most important. Yeshua answered really well there. Actually, guys, that was something I wanted to bring up real quick. I like that. The response from the scribe. Okay, because in verse 33, he expounds upon what Yeshua answered, but then at the very end he says, which is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices.
Yes.
So this is what's also alluded to in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 4 and 5. Where, quoting from the psalmist, the Hebrew is talking about Yeshua, who is speaking to the Father, saying, burnt offerings and sacrifices and sin offerings you are not pleased with, but a body you've prepared for me.
Yes.
to do your will, right? A body you've prepared for me to do your will. So the purpose here is that, or we, at least what this scribe is adding on to what Yeshua answered, and why Yeshua says, "Oh, you're not far from the kingdom. Good job," you know.
Yes.
So the reason why he's happy with this scribe and their interaction is because the scribe is trying to expound on the idea, and I've tried to think of the best analogy and the best way to put this. And so bear with me, guys, because even when I was doing videos on Hebrews chapter 10, it still can be a challenging way to describe this in a way, in a modern example that people can quickly understand, because we don't do sacrifices all the time. But basically, just like in Ezekiel, there was an entire time period of people in ancient Israel where they continued doing the sacrifices that were required through the law, but their hearts didn't love Yahweh. Okay, so, but they thought it was okay that they could just keep doing the sacrifices, even though they didn't love Yahweh, right? They were worshiping other gods at the same time. So my modern day equivalent to this is Catholic confession, where Catholicism will say, "Oh, you've sinned? Come and confess your sins, my son. Make sure you do the confession so you can be atoned and expiated for your sins." Whereas, do they teach you to not sin in the first place because you need to learn the word of God and do the commandments? No, they teach dispensation theology. The law's done away with.
Yeah.
So therefore, you have a problem here with, instead of teaching them to love the Lord, your God, they're saying, "Oh, it's okay if you don't do the behaviors that show you love him. Just come confess. Come confess." That was the idea of offering a burnt offering and sacrifice, and was their point to come confess their sins and make atonement. But you don't stress that part if you're not stressing the part where you love God by not sinning in the first place. Does that make any sense, guys? Am I saying this the right way?
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, I come from Catholic, I was raised Catholic, K through 12. And this whole chapter is just screams Catholicism, even though they were Jewish Sadducees and Pharisees. But it says, beware of men in long robes who speak lofty prayers and ask for your tithing all the time. Oh, you have to speak through me to get to Jesus. And, yeah.
Interesting.
We see Israel having issues with this throughout the Bible. We earlier, a few weeks ago, went through 1 Samuel 15, and there we see with Saul, right, where Samuel comes to him and says, in 1 Samuel 15:22, has Yahweh as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying his voice, right? For to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. And this is, sometimes people take it to the extreme, say that the Father never has any delight in sacrifices, but we see even in Psalm 51, right, with David is repenting, that at the very end he says, "When we repent and return, then you will have delight in our burnt offerings, in our sacrifices," right? Because the Father is more, he cares more about our heart being turned towards him first. And it's sort of like, a bad example too, I think, is when people are treating their parents with contempt or their neighbors despitefully, but when someone asks, "Are you a good person?" Say, "Yeah, I feed the homeless sometimes, once a month," and but they're failing on these most important commandments. And sometimes we have this this way of sort of trying to sweep under the rug what we're doing, because we think that, well, I'm doing all this good, so the Father might just not really address this part. But to obey is better than sacrifices, and it's a hard concept to explain. I agree, but
yeah, especially if you're in a system and a culture that has a practice of doing the sacrifices, because you think that's just part of it, and you're like, "Well, I'm doing this part, why?" He's like, "Yeah, well, he wants you to love him, he wants you to obey him, not just ask for forgiveness all the time." All right, so while Jesus was teaching at the temple, the scribes tested his understanding of Psalm 110:1, and he answered them wisely. And then he warned the people listening about the hypocritical non-Torah behavior of the scribes, like Nick mentioned. And yeah, by the way, Nick, I actually have a theory that I can't really prove yet, but I have a theory. So please bear with me, everyone listening, that the Pharisees just turned into the Catholic priests 300 years later.
Agreed.
Because they were already a plant of Rome anyway.
Yeah.
And in order to step in and control the narrative, you know what I mean? To control the doctrine. Just a theory, but I need to do some more research to show that on paper. But Yeshua commended the widow who gave very little monetary value to the temple because her heart of faith was right toward God. So this is, a beautiful story of, Yeshua being able to see the heart and be like, hey man, this lady, she's poor. She gave out of all she have, not just out of her great abundance, and so again, we don't want to twist that like a lot of, fortunately, like a lot of Catholic teaching does, to say you should give everything you have and live the life of a monk and, give all away your wealth to the church, right? That's just a wealth transfer that the church doesn't deserve.
Yeah.
Right. So this, there's moderation here, but the point was that, I don't know the woman's prayer and Yeshua doesn't expound, but there's moderation here. Just like he tells the guy, the scribe, or the lawyer in Matthew 19, right? Like he had a lot of real estate, he had great wealth. He's like, okay, sell what you have and come follow me. He's testing the heart of that person, right? The Torah doesn't actually tell you that you have to sell everything you have. And actually it says the opposite. It tells you when you do have a lot, because that will be the blessing of the covenant, here's how you act responsibly with it. So to bless others, So that's but yeah, Mark 12 is just a wonderful little short chapter. And in fact, it leads us into one of our segments here. Come, let us reason together. Okay, brothers. So this parable here at the beginning of Mark 12, I've actually done a video in the past, but it's just a fun little short conversation to explain this wonderful description. Is he gives this idea of, the vineyard being planted, wall put around it, the wine vat dug, and then there's a tower put in there. So what was the tower in Yeshua's parable? Since it's a parable, right? It's a description that represents something else. And this is this short little description he gave. Planted a vineyard, put a wall around it, dug a wine vat, and built a watchtower. This is typical when you're planting a tower in a vineyard. A lot of people, if you've never owned a vineyard, you don't know that this is a typical practice, is that they would build a watchtower to look over the land. Now, I don't know, I guess in modern days, if you got a nice rifle and a scope, you can probably pick off some animals or predators or whatever. But I would also imagine that the nature of the crop is very valuable. So you'd also want to keep people from coming into the edges of your land and stealing some of your crop with you not looking. So just the presence of the watchtower itself would hopefully deter thieves, but often it would be actually manned and guarded with someone inside of it. So there's some vineyards from different parts around the world, and they clearly have watchtowers. In fact, there's some fancy vineyards that they make it a deal to build special watchtowers like this one, right? That watch over the vineyards. This little fancy one that was built. Here's an old school one, kind of dilapidated, but they're still planting around it. Here's one on the hillside itself, right? Some beautiful imagery. And this is a wine vat. This is actually excavated from ancient Israel at a dig site. It's a pit in the ground. It crushed the grapes and on top of the platform, and then the liquid would flow into the holes and go down into the hole in the ground. Here's another one. I think this is fascinating, this one, because it has different compartments, because that reminds me of Sheol. It's fascinating. Yeah. So this is the idea of a wine vat, just to give you some help with the description of the parable for those in the audience. They would step on the grapes, do the stomping ceremony, and then the juices would be. To me, it's hilarious because you're like, man, get your dirty feet off my grapes. Is there no other creative way that we can figure out a way to press these grapes? You got to put your feet on them. But we see that parable being used throughout the scriptures, especially in Revelation, when the Father's ready to destroy the enemy. He talks about destroying them as stomping the grapes, basically. So let's look at the description here of Enoch 87, 1-4, of what happens with Yeshua. Because here's what I want to put forward, guys, to everyone watching, that this parable is the Father describing the general premise of the earth, but it would also be a parallel of the temple itself. So think about this for a minute. You have a man planted a vineyard, that's the earth. He put a wall around it, that's the firmament. He dug a wine vat, that's Sheol. And then he put a watchtower in it. It's the Garden of Eden. So in the same order of Genesis 1. Genesis 1:1, he created the heaven and the earth. The earth was unformed yet. It was just covered in water, undesigned, unformed, no topographical features. And before it was formed, he put the wall around it and dug the wine vat, which was the abysses that were created on day 2 down below, or on day 1, I should say. And then he built the watchtower on day 3, which is the Garden of Eden that he planted into the dry land that appeared when the water receded.
Mhm.
So it's even, the parable's even following the chronological order of creation. So in like manner, if you looked at the temple design that Solomon would have built, you would have had a vineyard, which would have been, I suppose, would have been the actual people. If the metaphor applies, that would be the people inside the temple, the priests, whom that wall was put around the temple. The wine vat would be the drainage system where the blood of the sacrifices would drain off into the sewage. And then you would have the tower, which was the actual large tower, the Holy of Holies, where the angel of the presence resided on top, where they would actually, serve the food for him. So, but if we look at it from the position of the overall creation, the Garden of Eden becomes this tower. And this is fascinating because in the book of Enoch and in Jubilees, we see that Enoch is taken into a high tower. And it's expressed in this vision here in Enoch 87, 1-4. And it says, again, I saw how they began to gore each other and to devour each other, and the earth began to cry aloud. Hey guys, for everyone in the audience watching, the reason why this is an interesting vision that I'm paralleling with Mark chapter 12 is because it's also a metaphor. The whole thing is this long, expansive metaphor between several chapters that goes throughout history. And as you'll see, some of the language here with the animals being representative of the people. So it goes, again, I saw how they began to gore each other and to devour each other, and the earth began to cry aloud. And I raised my eyes again to heaven, and I saw in the vision, and behold, there came forth from heaven beings who were like white men. And 4 went forth from that place, and 3 with them. And those 3 that had last come forth grasped me by my hand and took me up away from the generations of the earth, and raised me up to a lofty place, and showed me a tower raised high above the earth, and all the hills were lower. And he said, and one said unto me, remain here till you see everything that befalls those elephants, camels, and asses, and the stars and the oxen, and all of them. So this is just a short excerpt. I encourage you to go back and read Enoch 86-90, so you can get the fullness of this entire thing, so you can understand the reference to the stars, oxen, and different animals, and who they're portrayed as in this vision. But essentially, Jubilees gives us a very clear and direct explanation of what we just read in that metaphor in chapter 4, 22-24. He says, Enoch testified to the watchers who had sinned with the daughters of men, for these had begun to unite themselves so as to be defiled, and with the daughters of men. And Enoch testified against them all. And he was taken from among the children of men, and we conducted him into the Garden of Eden in majesty and in honor. And behold, there he writes down the condemnation and judgment of the world and all the wickedness of the children of men. And on account of it, God brought the waters of the flood upon all the land of Eden. For there he was set as a sign that he should testify against all the children of men, that he should recount all the deeds of the generations until the day of condemnation, which was leading up to the flood. So Enoch's not still alive, guys. And the Garden of Eden that's being referenced here, both here in Jubilees 4 and in 1 Enoch 87, was still on the ground. So after Adam and Eve got kicked out in Genesis 3, the garden didn't go anywhere. It was still on the ground.
Yeah.
So then later, several hundred years later, Enoch is taken back into the garden to be taken away from danger, as Hebrews 11:5 says, that he would not see death. Because there was a lot of carnage and chaos happening as the Nephilim were increasing on the earth during that day. So Enoch is taken away from that danger zone in order to be a scribe as a part of a priestly duty under the care of the watchers. This is where he spent 300 years with the watchers, learning all the motions of the heavenly luminaries and all the way the earth was created, and seeing visions of what would befall mankind up until the coming of the Son of Man. And this was part of that, is that he was taken to a high tower, because the Garden of Eden, as we've talked about, guys, in other videos, was a walled off enclosure that was really, really tall.
Mm-hmm.
This is why when we see it return and it's been expanded and made bigger, it's still really, really tall. And it comes back down out of heaven, which is where it was retracted into. So the whole point of this is that Yeshua is telling them this beautiful parable that in both occasions, both the overall creation of Genesis 1 and how Enoch was taken into that tower to testify against the bad leadership of his day, also applies to the temple that Yeshua was teaching in while he's having this conversation in Mark 12 with the chief priests, scribes, and elders listening to him, who were also the bad teachers of his day.
Yeah.
So if they understood the book of Enoch, which I don't know if they did because of the following conversation, but if they understood the book of Enoch, they would have seen that he's literally saying to them, like, not only are you bad teachers and the Father's going to come kill you for your behavior, just like he did when Enoch testified against the Watchers and was taken into a high tower back in the day, and all those people perished from judgment from Yahweh as well. So it's like, just, this would be infuriating to a corrupt leader. Which is what we talked about a little bit ago, right? Just absolutely infuriating that they would not want him talking like this. You know what I'm saying? Not want him pulling from, the metaphor of what they're standing in, much less the metaphor of creation with the rebellious Watchers and, everything that their culture and their history would have known was evil. He wouldn't want they wouldn't want to be compared to that. And they definitely wouldn't want him saying, hey, by the way, Yahweh's going to kill you because you guys have been completely disobedient servants that he trusted at one point,
Yeah. And, we going on that whole analogy, we see the same thing in the Tower of Babel. And I know that you've hit this point too, that, Nimrod and those guys, they built a city and a tower and even a garden, right? So he's just trying to copy what he heard his ancestors, I believe, talk about, where Yah used to dwell, and a place that has now been retracted. And in his arrogance and hubris, he wanted to recreate it, probably make it even better in his own mind, and wanted to go back up to where Yah was. And we also see Enoch sees the kingdom to come in Enoch chapter 24, where he sees these 7 beautiful mountains, right? And 3 are towards the south, 3 are towards the east, and then the one is in the midst, and that's where the Lord of glory, the Father and Son, will dwell. And I think that in the millennium reign, when people are thinking about doing bad things, they'll be able to see the watchtower, right, from wherever they are on the face of the earth, and just be like, yeah, I'm probably not going to do anything because the owner of the vineyard can see me. Yeah,
and for everyone listening out there, we're not talking about the Jehovah's Witness watchtower. We're talking about the true New Jerusalem, which is the great high tower that will be high above the earth, that can see down over all the earth. In fact, real quick, Hannibal, I've got our friend, our brother Tom. He sent me something just this morning.
Oh, yeah,
I want to share. Did he already send that to you?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, he just made this. He's a graphic designer, and he made this. And I'm going to share this real quick. He sent it to me. 1 second, guys. Sorry. Okay. Look at this. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. So he even made, the walls of the city to the point where you can actually see through them and see into the massive mountains that are described in Enoch. So big shout out to Tom, brother. He's also helping me with the context study guide. And and this will be a great, illustration to use for my Kingdom Come series as well. When I start delving further into the descriptions of the New Jerusalem, you got the 12 gates that he put, 3 on each side. The massive mountains in the middle. Throne of Yeshua is going to be at the top. And people will be able to, who live outside the city during the millennial reign, will be able to see this thing and just know that that's where the Lord of glory is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Tom is a great brother.
Yeah.
Wow.
Super beautiful. Oh, and by the way, it's over the circle of the earth, and it's coming down.
Yeah.
Coming down through the firmament. All right. There's a lot of good description here, right? This is great. Good job, Tom. I really appreciate you, brother. Using your gifts and talents for the Father. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you for enduring. It's been a longer portion today. I really appreciate you guys joining me. Would you have any last thoughts before we go?
No, thank you guys for joining. It's amazing to be surrounded with like-minded believers who just love digging deep into the Word and, better understanding it and relating it to this world. And as we see the times seemingly speeding up, we can be encouraged in knowing that the kingdom to come is really coming soon. So come, Yeshua, come quickly.
Yes.
Yeah. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Spread the word.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely, guys. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. It's such an honor to do this with you guys. You get to read the scriptures and talk about them together. And everyone in the live chat, thank you for participating. So you guys are awesome. And I'm
Yep.
gonna go Shabbat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Thank
Shabbat
you guys.
shalom,
We'll
brothers.
see you next week.